Disclaimer: the following content is entirely fictional and does not represent real events or people. This material has been edited and adapted from the channel Golden Hour Stories. The air was sickly sweet, filled with a sugary aroma. I squeezed my eyes shut, inhaling the ambrosial smell, peeking my head from my covers. My mom's pancakes were the only thing that could wake me up from a dead sleep. On my bedside table, my phone was blaring its alarm for the third time, but it just translated to white noise to me. Even with the music blasting, and the smell of my mother's delicious pancakes, sleep always won. I was drifting back into unconsciousness, my limbs becoming heavier by the second. "Ruby, turn that awful music off!" My eyes snapped open, and I was blinded by bright light. I squeezed my eyes shut and turned my head, shielding my face from the light that was streaming through my window that was vertical my bed. I pulled my comforter over my head, stifling a groan. I poked my hand out from under my covers, waving it around for a few moments until I hit my phone. The alarm cut off with a strangled cry. And then I was met with silence. By the time I had retracted my hand and was cradling it to my chest, bitter cold had already seeped in the cracks and into my warm cocoon. Realizing that the damage had already been done, I kicked my blankets off of my body and let the polar air nip at my body. I stretched, arching my back, before letting my arms fall to my side. Sitting there for a few moments, I rubbed my eyes, trying to get my body to kick into gear. Exhaling, I looked over at my phone, leaning over so I could pick it up. The screen flashed to life, and I looked at the notifications before nearly choking. I only had a few minutes to get ready and be out the door. In my house, it was customary that I woke up late, and at this point it would be abnormal if I woke up at a normal time. As I persist to the attendance lady in my school, my family are my enablers. Not only do they not wake me up at appropriate times, fully knowing I won't do it myself, they also force me to stay up and do slave labor such as, and not excluded to, the dishes. The attendance lady was, to say the least, never pleased with my excuses. I dropped my phone on my nightstand and leapt out of my bed, cautiously trying to avoid stepping on any miscellaneous objects that were strewn on the floor of my bedroom. As I struggled to get to my bathroom, which was connected to my room by a narrow door, it was moments like these I cursed myself for forgetting to clean my room, though I hadn't in months, and there was a fat chance I would anytime soon. I cracked open my bathroom door, clicking on the light. The granite counter of my bathroom was covered in my different products. On the other side of the bathroom, directly across from my door, was another, which led to my brother's room. We shared our bathroom, and since he was as messy as I, it only led to the shared space being a disaster. I did my normal routine, washing my face turbo speed and brushing my teeth. I put in my contacts, and I had one foot out of the bathroom door when I finally noticed my hair. A gasp left my mouth as I went to reach for my tangled chocolate brown hair. Its usual curls were now knotted and tangled. Normally it was a dark, curly mess, but today it was a plain travesty. "You look like a commodore, Dottie," my inner wolf teased. She laughed inside my head as I inspected my hair, deciding the best course of action. Dottie was just like me, which was not a good thing. "Oh, thanks, Dottie. I'll remember that next time I go into wolf form." "I'm thinking a mud bath for two?" I threatened back, opening my drawer so I could grab a paddle brush. It might be a corporal sin to brush your hair with a dry brush, but I was out of luck already in the hair department. I tugged the brush through my hair, wincing periodically as it got caught on my knots. Deciding I couldn't back out now, I roughed it out. Over and over I combed it through my tangles. It took a few minutes, whittling away at my time, but the end product was somewhat workable. I put some product in it, scrunching it up in my hands, before calling it quits. It was fluffy and undefined, but it would have to do. Finally leaving my bathroom, I took one more look at my phone and groaned. I had 6 minutes left. 6 minutes to get dressed, gather my stuff, and get out the door. Stumbling over to my closet, I tugged open my closet, sighing in aggravation. My clothes were piled up in a few heaps on my closet floor, overflowing from my hamper. I sifted through my clothes, pulling out a simple white shirt and some jeans. I grabbed my fluffy pink jacket from the top of the pile and stepped out of my closet. I struggled to get the clothes, but in the end it came together semi-well. I grabbed my phone and slipped on my boots. Trudging to my door, I glanced at my room one last time before slipping into the hallway. I rushed down the stairs, my stomps echoing through the stairwell. When I got down to the ground floor, I paused sheepishly. My mother stood in the kitchen, her arms crossed, shooting a glare at me. Her anger radiated through the room, and I could see her eyes dart from me towards the pile of pancakes that were placed nicely at my spot at the table. "Mom, I don't have time," I pleaded, motioning to the clock we had mounted on the wall. Her eyebrow went up, and she repositioned herself, ignoring any form of sympathy. I stared at her for a few moments, before realizing there was no way I would get out of breakfast. Rushing to my seat, I plopped down in my chair and picked up my fork. Within 3 minutes I had downed the pile of pancakes, and though I almost choked a few times, I was still happy. I still had time to get to school, and my mother had mellowed out a bit. "Bye, Mom, thanks for breakfast," I called to my mother as I stood from the table, nearly knocking over my chair. I ran to the door, grabbing my backpack, which I had discarded by the coat rack the night before. Slamming the door shut after me, I jumped down my front steps, nearly stepping on my mom's pansies as I landed. I sighed in relief that I hadn't squished them, and continued down the path that connected to my driveway. My light blue 1966 convertible sat, waiting for me. It was a pain in the ass to get. It took a few shady jobs, a lot of auto repairs and hours of being stranded on the side of the road, but I finally got it working as well as it could. It was a gift from my grandfather, who told me that if anything happened to it he would murder me. I wanted to tell him it barely worked as it was, but I kept my mouth shut. I got into my car quickly, throwing my shoulder bag into the passenger seat before cranking it on. I turned on the radio, finding a station I liked. It happened to be playing Adele, so I spent a good portion of the drive belting Turning Tables by Adele. It was more of a strangled sing-along for me. I wasn't exactly known for my singing abilities. The drive was fast and reckless, as it normally was. I was checked out most of driver's ed, and only passed my driving test by a few points. I checked my phone at my first red light, sighing when I saw my mother had sent me a long text about the ramifications of waking up late. I replied as quickly as possible, before tossing my phone in my bag. I slowed when I pulled into my school's parking lot, watching everyone closely as I looked for my parking place. I pulled into my parking spot, putting my car in park and grabbing my bag. It was October, but the sun was beating down like it was August. Grabbing my sunglasses from my glove compartment, I opened my car door and got out. As I walked towards the front of the school, I flashed a cheerful smile to whoever I saw, waving occasionally to different people. The school parking lot was a muted mess of blues and grays, our school colors. We were the Fremont Sharks, the only high school in our small town. Named after James Charles Fremont, the school was a staple of the town. It was newer than most of the buildings, only being a few years old, but the county had run out of money halfway through building it. That meant the amenities were lacking quality, but we had plenty of obnoxiously big windows. Everything inside was a coin toss to whether it was broken or not, normally landing on broken. I took off my sunglasses as I came to the picnic tables that were situated around the side of the building. They were in clusters directly opposite the doors to the east side of the school. My best friend sat at a picnic table, which was the only empty picnic table. She was scrolling on her phone, drinking an iced coffee. I dropped my bag on the picnic table as soon as I walked up, collapsing on the bench with a groan. Maddie glanced up, her lips tipping into a smile. Immediately she started going on a tangent. "Starbucks is driving me nuts. I can't go in there without getting prosecuted by the employees," Maddie exclaimed dramatically, handing me a hot chocolate. I took a sip, before looking at her. "Is it that boy Aaron?" I asked, and she nodded glumly. "You'd think that he'd get the idea after I didn't text him back, but I suppose not," Maddie said, taking a long sip of her coffee before looking around absent-mindedly. The wind caused the leaves to ruffle along the ground, and forced a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have given him your number in the first place," I chuckled, glancing away from her. Maddie's parents were the betas of our pack. Maddie, however, had much more of a docile personality, with the only mean bones in her body meant for her mate and Sarah. Even me, but only on occasion. "Where's Sarah?" she said suddenly, her eyes gliding around the parking lot. I looked with her, before shrugging. I suspected that she was running late with her face stuffed in her sketchbook. Her interest in school was null, like mine, yet she could keep up perfect grades. She was always working on her sketchbook, easily blocking out everything around her. "Calm your asses down, I'm here." We looked towards our right, and located Sarah. She had her sketchbook held tight to her side, and her backpack in her other hand. Her lips were tugged into a bored frown. Sarah was different than Maddie and I. Her attitude was often cold and bitter, normally because she'd rather be left alone than be forced to socialize. Her parents were pack politicians, important leaders who dealt with other packs. This job entailed that they weren't home almost all of the time, as they were constantly traveling. Sarah preferred to be secluded from others because it was how she was raised, sheltered from the outside world. Her cold attitude never stopped Maddie and I. No matter how awful she could be, we knew deep down she appreciated us. Or, at least, we hoped. "Did you roll around in the dirt?" Sarah asked as soon as she saw me, her eyebrow going up. I knew she was teasing, but I still had to roll my eyes dramatically. "Oh, real funny, I just struggled this morning," I exclaimed, crossing my legs. Sarah's lips tipped into a smile for a moment, before she went back to her normal stoic face. We only had a few moments to relax before the bell started ringing. I slung my bag over my shoulder and locked arms with Maddie. Maddie forcefully grabbed Sarah, and we began walking towards the school doors. "A little birdie told me we're going to have a new English teacher," Maddie said as we opened the doors. We stepped inside, basking in the warmth of the building. Kids rushed back and forth, looking to get to their lockers. "What happened to Miss Crimson?" Sarah asked as we walked to our locker. Our combined laziness meant we all shared one locker, as close to our first block as possible. Miss Crimson was, in all honesty, a loser. She had a nauseating personality, and could find ways to drone on and on about her pitiful life, pitiful by her own reckoning, all by her own hand. She was our first period English teacher, and had been for 2 years straight. "I heard that she broke her leg," Maddie said, tugging her books out of the locker. Sarah did the same, whilst I had once again left my books at home. I shut the locker and spun the lock. "Anyways, we have a new sub now. And I've heard he's a guy," Maddie said with a smirk, tossing her black curls off of her shoulder. I shot Maddie a smile. "You do remember you're mated to my brother, right? God did not put boys on this planet for us to just ignore them. Besides, I can look at the candy as much as I want as long as I don't eat it," Sarah said, chuckling. I couldn't help but laugh as well, and even Sarah smirked for a moment. The final warning bell rang, and kids nearly toppled over themselves to get to their first period. "Geez, you'd think they actually want to go to class," I said grimly as I watched kids rush for their classrooms. Red-faced freshmen somehow still unprepared for the day, and seniors sluggishly trying to avoid getting hit. "We should probably get going too," Sarah said, her narrowed eyes skimming the hallway. Maddie sighed, but nodded. I said nothing, instead letting them lead me towards English. English was only a few doors down from the lockers, and even a few meters away the steady, clamorous laughter of the people inside could be heard. I noticed Fletcher first when I came to the door. He was leaned against the doorframe, grinning goofily at passerbys. A Letterman jacket was slung across his shoulders. "Hello, beautiful," Fletcher said cheerfully as I walked up, reaching out towards me. I broke off from Maddie, grabbing Fletcher's hand. He tugged me close, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Fletcher, as charismatic as always," I said, nudging Fletcher in the side. He led me inside the room, sking under his breath. Fletcher was going to say something more, but was drowned out by the voices of his friends, beckoning him over. He just winked at me, kissing my hand gently before leaving me. Maddie and Sarah made their ways to their seats, which were horizontal to each other. I sat in front of Maddie, casting her a tired look, before looking forward. The classroom was vacant of a teacher, and was only the bare bones of what it used to be. The bookshelf near her desk remained full of books, but the personal ones were taken off. The only creepy remembrances of her were her odd animal figurines that covered her desk. The teacher, as it would seem, was running late. We waited patiently for a few passing minutes after the bell rung, before falling into easy conversation. Then, only a few minutes after the bell had rung, a sweet smell filled my lungs. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply as I tried to place it. It was not like anything I had ever smelled before. It was as delightful as my mother's pancakes. No. More so. "That smells delicious," Dottie said dreamily in my head, almost more affected than I. I nodded slowly, squeezing my eyes shut tight as I inhaled. My hearing became centered as the door to the room creaked open. I could hear every step, every deep breath. My eyes shot open, and I pulled myself from my slumped position in my seat. "I'm sorry I'm late, I had trouble finding the school," the new man who had entered the classroom said. My eyes darted to him, and I took him in. He was tall and handsome. His hair was dark brown, tousled on top of his head. I could feel myself getting lost with every moment, and as the seconds went by, I waited for him to meet my eyes. He paused. His eyes glided to meet mine. My breath caught in my throat as he took me in. All my senses were out of control, drowned out by silence. Then, in a second, everything Dottie was howling became clear. "Mate." My heart was pounding. I could hear each individual beat in my ears, and feel it pulse in the tips of my fingers. This man was my mate? I blinked a few times, before I broke my gaze. Looking down at my desk, I squeezed my hands into tight balls and took a long, deep breath. It didn't help, because with every inhale I was confronted with the sweetness of his smell. He moved from the door to his desk. Every footstep weighed in my head, and every time he breathed, it was as loud as a pan being smashed. Dottie was whimpering in excitement. "All right, first I would like to do the roll. Please say here when I get to your name," he called out. His voice was deep and smooth. It made something burn in my stomach. I glanced up, swallowing as I took him in again. He didn't look up at me. Instead, his eyes were trained on his clipboard. He went through the first few names. Every name that passed, he would glance up and his eyes would meet mine, until he would place the name with the right person. His posture was rigid as he went down the list. It wasn't long before he found my name, and he called it out. He looked at me immediately after he said it. I forced out a small "here" through my tight lips, my voice mousy. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, before his gaze returned back to the clipboard. Once he finished calling roll, he put his paper down. He picked up a cow figurine from Miss C's desk, turning it over in his hand with a frown, his eyebrows knit in confusion. He looked up again, putting the figurine down. "My name is Mr. Wood. I am going to be your substitute for this semester as Miss Crimson is recovering from her fall," my mate said. A few kids snickered, but under his dark glare they fizzed out into silence. "I was told that you all have notebooks that you do warm-ups in," he said. "I want you to write a paragraph about yourselves." He looked back at the roll one more time, before his eyes met mine. "Miss Delson. A moment, please." Everyone stifled a groan as they dug in their bag to find their notebooks. I choked down a swallow, grinding my teeth as I met his eyes. His gaze was fleeting, and for a moment he watched over the class before leaving the classroom. I stood sluggishly, holding my breath. My anxiety was through the roof as I walked after him, my heart still thundering in my chest. Dottie was starting to quiet down, curious about what was going to happen. He was leaning against the wall next to the door, tapping his foot as he waited for me. Once I stepped through, he shut the door quietly, pressing his back against it once he heard it click close. I clutched my hands together, anxiously looking around, waiting for him to speak. I didn't quite expect what he was going to say to me. He looked me up and down, grinding his jaw before speaking. "I, Connell Wood, reject you as a mate." His look was stone cold and callous, but I could only pay attention for a short, fleeting moment before everything went to hell. My heart cracked, and I let out a sharp cry as my hands flung to my chest. Dottie went silent, cowering away. My breath was shaky as I clenched my shirt. With every moment my chest felt like it was 1 second closer to splitting. Connell stayed the same, but his breaths became staccato, Finally, my voice found me and I looked at him once more. "Why?" I asked. My voice was soft and weak. I stumbled a step back, my throat tightening. He looked at me. No expression on his face. "I'm sorry." I knew I wouldn't get anything more out of him. I knew that with those 2 words this was the end of the conversation. Turning away from him, I walked to the glass doors that were horizontal the classroom. I didn't want to run away. It felt cowardly. But my body felt as though it was falling apart. Tears started to fall down my face, making my skin wet and sticky. I ran until I reached the parking lot, cries racking my body. I caught a glance at myself when I opened my car door, and it only made me cry harder. My face was a vibrant red, patched with white. I stayed in my car for an hour, wasting gas before I finally pulled out. My tears had stopped for the moment, but my head was pounding. I tried to control my shaking as I drove home, trying desperately to forget about him. Every moment of distraction was interrupted with the realization that this was real. He was real. My family were all gone when I got home, so I tugged off my shoes and trudged up the stairs. I felt pain swell in my chest as I collapsed on my bed. I thought about Maddie and Sarah, and guilt fluttered in my stomach. They would be curious, perhaps worried about my sudden disappearance. It was all too much for me to think about, so I put my head in my hands and closed my eyes. Hours passed in silence. My limbs became stiff from the hours of lying in the same position. I was convinced my tear ducts were completely out of tears, because they just stopped. Not because I was healed, but because I was tired. Zach was the first one home in the evening. He entered the house as he did every day, practically ripping the door open. I heard him drop his bag on the ground and a groan. "Ruby?" he called out. He was most likely staring at the ceiling, waiting for my irritated reply. Instead, he was met with silence. "Ruby, you can't ignore me!" His footsteps thundered through the house as he trampled upstairs. My room was across from his, at the end of the hallway. I shifted in my bed, stretching my sore muscles. "Ruby," he called out in a sing-song voice. He tried to open the door but was met with it being locked. I never locked my door, usually because I was too lazy. "Hey, are you okay?" He was worried. He tried again to open the door, as though the lock would become unlocked in a second. I looked at the doorknob. A sigh stuck in my throat. I was too tired to move, in too much pain to open the door. "Ruby, please, open the door." "Go away," I mumbled, pushing my face into my comforter. He didn't hear me, his voice getting gradually louder. "Open the door or I'll rip it off the hinges." I lifted my face and looked at the door. It hadn't occurred to me he would do that, but I was sure he would do that. "I'm coming." My voice was soft, and nearly inaudible. I pulled my legs from underneath my covers, and stood up from my bed, my muscles groaning from the sudden change. I made my way to my door, each footstep stronger than the last. I turned the lock and pulled the door open, squinting at the light that was coming from the hallway. My bedroom was dark, my blinds pulled shut and every light turned off. Zach examined me, and his face changed from worried to pure confusion. He looked me up and down, from my disheveled clothes to my red face. "Ruby," he whispered, a look of sorrow coming over his features. I knew he didn't know what had happened, but I also knew that he's never seen me like this. I was a crybaby, but I never cried like this, not even on my worst days. I was silent for a second, letting him fully take me in. Then, he was in my room, taking me into an embrace as I began to cry again. The tears I was convinced were dried up were in fact not, and it only took something to re-trigger them for them to show up again. He lifted me into his arms, holding me tightly. He walked a few paces forward until he was at my bed, sitting down on it with me still in his arms. I was tired of crying, but my body wouldn't allow me to stop. Every time I was almost quiet, my heart would constrict, and my throat would close, and the cycle would start again. We sat there for 20 minutes, him trying to console me while I wept. By the end of it there were no more tears, and we were just sitting in silence. Once he knew I was done with crying, he pulled away, holding my hands in his. "What happened, Ruby?" he asked, his voice cracking. Zach was far more protective than Head liked to admit, and he could also be very empathetic at times. Even so, I had never seen him like this, never so distraught. My hands moved to my face to try and wipe away some stray tears from my cheeks. Wispy curls clung to the wet spots. I knew something was off. I could feel it. I started to say. But I just began to cry again. Mecca said he wouldn't reject me. Mecca said, I wasn't an overly confident person, but I like to believe I was a likable person. I had friends, I was average looking, and I could always make someone smile. There was never a moment where I disliked myself, or put myself on a low stool. Yet, the way I felt now, certainly was going towards that. It felt so wrong of me to pick apart myself, trying to find anything that could be considered undesirable about myself. But there had to be something he didn't like. There had to be a reason for him to immediately reject me. Immediately reject the person he was supposed to love the most. The one his soul was made for. Your mate rejected you? Zach asked me slowly, processing it. He was having trouble accepting that his well-loved little sister was completely denied from the one thing in a werewolf's existence that they yearned for the most. I didn't say anything, keeping my face in my hands. My silence seemed to confirm it for him. Anger radiated off of him. But he tried to keep it concealed as he pulled me towards him, wrapping me in a tight hug. He didn't say anything for a few minutes. He just kept his breathing regulated and rubbed my back. We only parted when we could hear the garage door go up, signaling my dad was home. Ruby? Zach asked as soon as we separated. Who was it? The question was simple and cut clean, yet I couldn't answer it. I looked away from him, my mind conflicting with what I wanted to do. I knew that if I told him who it was, he'd march out of the house until he found the man and smash his face into a wall. For some reason I couldn't bear telling him, having someone else know my secret. I just wanted to mourn alone, without people asking questions. I just shook my head, hoping he wouldn't prod it any further. Zach sighed, but let it go anyways. Standing, he gave me a quick kiss on my head, and began to walk to my door. Kids, what do you want for dinner? My father's booming voice echoed through the house. Zach answered for me, leaving my room. I laid back down on my bed, exhaling slowly as tingles drifted up and down my legs. I had slept for hours, yet in my chest I could still feel spikes of fatigue. Rubbing my eyes, I decided it would be better to just go downstairs instead of being shut up at my room. I quickly tried to fix my appearance in my mirror before walking downstairs. As soon as I came onto the platform to the bottom of the stairs, I was met with a lot of steam. My mother was chopping tomatoes at the counter, which was to the right of the stairs, separating the kitchen from the dining table. My father was staring intensely at the pasta noodles, and if he had any ounce of cooking abilities, he'd know that they wouldn't burn. Straight across from the stairs was the front door, and to the left of that was the living room. I walked over towards the couch farthest from the door, collapsing down on top of it. My parents hadn't yet clued in that I was upset, but my brother's eyes remained glued to me as he set the table. I guess he was waiting for me to start crying once again, as I had done multiple times today. I played with my necklace, a faux silver chain with a ring at the end of it. I squeezed the ring in my palm until it left marks in my skin, before letting it fall through my nimble fingers. As I stared off at a wall, I suddenly heard the distant sounds of a man's voice. I shifted my eyes towards the windows that were next to the dining room table, my skin prickling with goosebumps. No one else seemed curious about the sound. I stood up from the plush couch, my curiosity piquing, and I walked over towards the window. Long, thick white curtains hung in front of the window, shielding it from the afternoon sunset. I could see the soft, yet retreating glow from other side. Wrapping my hands around the cotton curtains, I paused for a moment before yanking the curtains open. I blinked a few times as my eyes adjusted, before a gasp became choked in my throat. There, standing with his arms crossed, was Mr. Wood. He was standing next to a large moving truck, talking to a man with a clipboard. His eyebrows were pinched, and he was wearing a pair of glasses that made him even more attractive than before. Another man stumbled out of the next-door house, and I narrowed my eyes on him as he walked towards Mr. Wood. "Mom, is that person moving in next door?" I asked, looking away from the window. The answer was obvious, but I still didn't want to believe it. My mom stopped her conversation with my father to look at me. She smiled pleasantly, nodding. "Yes, honey, that nice man is moving in next door. He came to say hello yesterday evening when you were out with your friends, but he hadn't been able to move in until today." My whole world felt like it was crumbling piece by piece. He had taken my soul and crushed it into a million pieces, and now he was taunting me by living next door. "Oh, oh," I said quietly, looking out the window once more. Mr. Wood took a box from one of the younger movers, who was obviously having trouble. My eyes naturally lowered to his biceps, which seemed to be tight in his button-up shirt. It was the same shirt he was wearing this morning, as I could recall. "Which reminds me, Ruby, we're having dinner with him tomorrow, so you can't go stay with your friends," my mom told me, before tasting the steaming tomato sauce. What? My day could only get worse. I looked out at the window, then back at my mother with a feverish expression. What if he's some kind of serial killer? "Are you going to let a serial killer into your house?" My mother rolled her eyes at me, brushing her hands lightly on her apron as if to rid it of any dust. "He's not a serial killer, Ruby, and I don't know why you're so against this. I know you wanted to visit your friends, but sometimes more important things arise," my mother said. "Besides, it's important that our neighbors like us." "No, it's not," I whined, crossing my arms. "This is the end of the discussion, Ruby," my mother said sternly, giving me a mom look before looking back at her cutting board. Dinner was quick, and soon enough I was back in my room, covered in a mountain of blankets. I wasn't sure what to do, but I could still feel the pain radiating in my chest, pestering me to do something. Picking up my phone, I finally decided to look at my friends' texts. They were both worried, which meant they were both texting me very kindly and threatening me. Whatever worked in their books, that was all that mattered. I put them in a group call and called them, surprised when it only took a few seconds before they answered. "Ruby, why didn't you say something before you left? We were worried," Maddie scolded, her motherly voice coming out. I sat there, trying to figure out what to say. I hated lying to my friend, but I wasn't sure I was ready to tell them about Connell. I suddenly felt really sick, and Mr. Wood saw and told me to go home. I fibbed, twirling my hair in my fingers as I chose my words. Silence crossed the speaker, no one speaking for a short few seconds, before Maddie's voice once again came up. I could tell they didn't believe me, but both of them knew not to push it any further. "Okay, Ruby. I'll give you your bag tomorrow when you get to school," Maddie said slowly. Before Maddie could say anything else, her mom's loud voice came over the speaker, calling her downstairs. She sighed, yelling down that she'd be there momentarily, and then to us said a quick goodbye. She left soon after, leaving me and Sarah alone. Sarah, who had been silent the entire time, finally decided to say something. "You know, you can tell us anything, we'll understand." I shut my eyes, my jaw twitching. "I know." Maddie let out a dramatic sigh, leaning against our locker. "I think I failed my chem test," she said, nonchalant, inspecting her perfectly manicured nail. "I'm shocked you haven't failed the class yet," Sarah responded, her eyes lifting from her sketchbook. "You never show up." Neither Maddie or Sarah questioned me when I showed up to school. They were both gently skating around the elephant in the room, and for that I was grateful. "If it's any consolation in failing like 2 classes, Maddie looked at me with a smile. She reached her hand out towards me as the bell let out a loud, dull buzz. We began to sluggishly walk to the classroom. Connell was sitting at his desk when we arrived, reading through papers on his desk. Dottie whimpered as we passed him, before retreating again. I felt bad that Dottie had to endure Connell with me. The pain of rejection hit her hard. I sat in my seat, letting my bag fall to the side of my chair. Connell glanced up to me, before calmly looking back at the papers he was working on. My stomach fluttered with anger over the fact that he seemed completely unconcerned over losing his mate. How could it not matter to him? I pulled out my notebook, trying to forget about it. The classroom slowly began to fill up. The bell had let out its final buzz when Connell called me to the front of the room. I stood slowly, balling my hands into fists around my sweater. My body moved but my mind stayed stagnant. Connell looked up at me when I stopped in front of his desk, putting down his pen. He had dark framed glasses on, which he took off to look at me. I tried to stop the pain that was swelling inside of me. The hurt. Dottie retreated back into my mind, which hurt as much as seeing him. I inhaled softly as Connell took a stack of papers from a bin on his desk, writing in perfect cursive the date that they were due at the top of them. He then put my name at the top and stapled them together. "These are the papers you missed yesterday. They're due next Monday," Connell told me, before handing them to me. He looked straight in my eyes, and realization washed over me. He couldn't not feel it. It was impossible. Mates would always feel when another was in pain, especially if they were rejected. Even though he was the one that rejected me, he would feel the pain of our souls separating. I felt a sadistic comfort from knowing that. Clutching the papers to my chest, I didn't say anything when I turned to walk to my seat. My mind was swirling, and it continued to do so through the entire lesson. He didn't call on me. In fact, he called on about everyone else but me. Maybe he knew I wouldn't be able to answer it. Or that I was just going to make a fool of myself if I even tried. It didn't matter, because it didn't come to that. When the class ended, I shoved my papers messily in my bag, walking over to Maddie. She slowly put her papers in her bag, and I knew she was just stalling from having to go to math. I really didn't want to stall, though. So I forced her to go quicker. I looked at Connell once more before we left. As we passed, I saw him stop writing, but he didn't look up. It seemed he was having an inner conflict. As soon as we stepped out of the door, his pen once again touched his paper, and he started writing again. I tried to forget about him for the rest of the day, focusing on my schoolwork instead. My teachers even commented that I was surprisingly tranquil, unlike usual. The day went by fast, and when we finished with school, Maddie begged me to go to Temptations Cafe, a local cafe, with Sarah and her. "I don't drink coffee," I reminded them, slouching down lower in my seat as Maddie bantered on. I had a feeling that she wouldn't leave without me coming with her. "They have hot chocolate," Maddie tried to convince me, shaking my shoulder to get me to pay attention. I thought about what my mother had said before, something about how I wasn't allowed to go with Maddie or Sarah today. Still, I was irritated and needing of some friend time. I sighed, looking at them. Although Sarah was more or less uninterested, Maddie's bright face sealed the decision. It was always a challenge to say no to Maddie. Maddie looked at me expectantly, and after a moment of inner deliberation, I agreed. She clapped her hands, a grin on her lips. The ride to Temptations was short. Sarah rode with Maddie and I followed behind. Temptations Cafe was a local hit, with its small trendy interior and friendly staff. It was nearly empty though, a pleasing sight. Maddie says the coffee is the best, Sarah is always impartial about it. But I knew she enjoyed it. "Sarah's entered yet another competition," Maddie said, brushing her curls off of her shoulder. Sarah's eyes darted up, and she shot a glare at Maddie. "She doesn't want me to tell anyone, but I couldn't help it," Maddie said with a smirk. I chuckled, taking a sip of my hot chocolate. "It's not that big of a deal," Sarah said quietly, playing with her straw wrapper. "I probably won't get very far." Maddie shook her head. "It is so a big deal. Apparently if you become a finalist, they'll do an art show for you." Sarah looked away. "As if my parents would let me do that." "I bet your parents will be proud," Maddie said, her voice insistent. Sarah looked distant, but gave us a small smile. "Sure." I stared at Sarah for a few moments before looking away. Her parents couldn't be described as the supporting kind. They were PAC politicians and traveled for most of the year. They mended PACs together and helped keep our PAC safe, but they paid little attention to Sarah. When they did, it was always over their distaste for her being an artist and not taking after them. I laughed at them both, and soon enough we were all laughing. It was nice just being able to talk, and forget about the awful few days I've been having, letting the thoughts just drift away from me for a little bit. We finished at the cafe about an hour later, Maddie and Sarah leaving with a rush of caffeine, and me leaving with a rush of sugar. Maddie said she'd drive Sarah home, and they left soon after. The drive home was quiet, but I welcomed it. I had too much noise going on in my head, that just having pure silence seemed calming. Pure silence normally drove me crazy, but it was a nice change. My parents' cars were parked in the driveway when I got home. I could feel my stomach turn as I remembered that we were going to have dinner with him. I didn't feel prepared. I hated not feeling prepared, but I wasn't even sure I could eat dinner with him. Dottie certainly didn't think she could. You sat through an entire class with him, I reminded myself as I opened my car door, slamming it shut soon after. My parents always told me I shut doors too hard. I had to agree with myself on that notion. I had sat through an entire class with him talking the whole time. If I can do that, I'm sure I could sit through one dinner. My parents were preparing dinner when I walked in. They always went overboard when it came to visitors, wanting to appear as put together as possible. My mother looked up at me from the carrots she was cutting when I stepped past the door, her mouth going into a thin line. She put down the knife and put her hands to her hips, giving me a motherly stare. "Ruby, what did I tell you yesterday?" she asked, fully expecting an answer. I gave a small, nervous smile, lifting my shoulders. She narrowed her eyes at me, taking a step away from the kitchen island. "Well, how about I remind you? Does this ring a bell?" She then continued to repeat the entire conversation we had had the night before. A simple answer would have been her telling me that she said she wanted me to come home after school, but my mother doesn't work like that. "Okay, mother, I get it. I'll listen next time." I put my hands up to show I surrendered, and she smiled gently. Moving from behind the counter, she came to hug me. I wasn't expecting it, but I hugged her back. "I know you will, because you're grounded over the weekend," my mom said, leaving a quick kiss on my temple before going back to her carrots. My jaw dropped as I watched her saunter off, trying to process what had happened. "Isn't that a bit much?" I asked, and she shook her head, cutting the carrots with a sort of spunk. "Not when you add on the fact that you've failed to listen to what I've said for the past week. Now, Ruby, I know you don't mean to be rebellious, but that doesn't change the fact that you need to pay more attention," my mother said sternly, before smiling as she went back to her carrots. The only good thing that came out of it was the Dottie got a good laugh. I wanted to tell her that that would mean I wouldn't be able to shift, but I kept it to myself. My father had been quiet the entire time, focusing on the onion he was attempting to cut. I got my cooking skills from him, which were null. I ran upstairs and went straight to my room. I tried to avoid the things on my floor as I fell into the soft covers of my bed. If I could have sat there for longer, I would have. But soon the thought of seeing Connell once again dragged me out of bed. I figured if I was going to be seeing him, I might as well look presentable, in attempt to look like I'm not dying inside. I layered on concealer and put on some mascara. It seemed to quell the black circles and redness of my face for the time being. When I was done, I put on some jeans and an oversized sweater shirt. I left my room soon after that, running down the creaky stairs to get to the kitchen. My parents were finally plating the food, and my brother was setting the table. "You look nice, Ruby," my mother commented when I joined them, but smacked my hand that was encroaching on the pasta. I sighed dramatically, leaving my parents to go to the living area. I collapsed on the couch, vertical the front windows, closing my eyes. I was allowed to stay like that for a few minutes, listening to my parents walk around and mindlessly say things to each other. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. My eyes snapped open as I lifted myself onto my elbows. "Ruby, go open the door," my mother said to me. I stifled a groan and rolled off of the couch, standing a moment after. When I got to the front door, I just stared at it, mulling over what to say once it was opened. Using my werewolf hearing, I listened to his breathing, and when I heard him lift his arm to knock, I opened the door. The look on his face when his eyes met mine was pure confusion, and then in a split second he composed himself. He was obviously not aware that I was his next-door neighbor, and by the way his shoulders became stiff, I'm sure it wasn't a welcomed surprise. I gave him a tight-lipped smile, moving to the side so that he could come in. He gave me a curt nod, slipping in past me. I followed a few steps behind until we diverged as we came into the open living room. "Mr. Wood, I'm so glad you could make it," my mother said cheerfully, wiping her hands on her brown apron. She came out from behind the kitchen counter and gave him a friendly hug. I rolled my eyes, walking over to the couch. My mother was always friendly with other people, though I'm sure if she knew who Connell really was she wouldn't be as fond. Connell and my parents talked to each other while the food was being made, which in my eyes made the food take way longer. Zach came to join me on the couch, sighing when he realized it was going to be a few minutes until we could eat. By the time my parents and Connell were done talking, enough time had passed to the point that I was too hungry to care that Connell was even there. Dottie had completely reserved herself, the same way she had done a few days before. It hurt me, her blocking me out, but I understand how she felt. I sat at one head of the table, and Connell sat at the other. Us being directly across from each other didn't help the burning in my chest. Our eyes never met, him looking at his plate most of the time, and me looking anywhere but him. I sighed in relief when my mother started to place the food on the table, but gave me a look when I attempted to grab some of it. I could hear her nagging voice in my head. "Wait until it's all on the table, you hungry wolf." Finally, the last dish was set down, and I just started to grab. I piled my food onto my plate, nibbling on a breadstick as I served myself. Once everyone had gathered their food, my mother started making conversation. "Ruby, how was your day?" my mother asked. I picked up another breadstick, much against the narrowed look she gave me. "Fine," I mumbled, stabbing my salad with my fork. My mother tucked a piece of her brown hair behind her ear, giving me another look that meant elaborate. I just didn't do much. Letting my fork rest on the rim of my bowl, I tore apart yet another breadstick. My mother let out a hum, before turning to my brother, asking him how he was. I was glad to have her off of me, knowing she was just trying to get an answer out of me because we had company. On any other day, she would have been okay with just a fine. I sat quietly as my parents and my brother talked. My brother was a bit more convincing with his questions, easily able to patter on with conversation. After she seemed to be finished asking us questions, she turned to Connell. "Where are you moving from?" my mother asked. Connell picked up his water glass, seeming to take great interest in it. He swished the water around in it and looked at my mother. "I'm from Washington," he said, taking a short sip of his water. My mother hummed politely. "I see, Virginia must be quite different." Connell shrugged. "I suppose." Seeming unsatisfied with his answer, my mother continued to prod. "Well, what about your old pack, how were they?" Connell didn't answer for a few seconds, his hands turning white as they tightened around his glass. I was afraid the glass would shatter under his grip. Instead of breaking it, he just put the glass down, a pleasant smile crossing his face. A shiver ran down my spine as I watched him compose himself so suddenly. "They were well enough," he said simply, his ice blue eyes connecting with my mother's. I knew nothing about him or his pack, but by his tone I could tell that he wasn't telling the truth. I was impressed by Connell's ease of letting things go. He was soon engaged in a conversation with my father, any irritation from the previous question gone. It was almost admirable, if not a little bit creepy. The dinner continued much in the same fashion, my parents directing aimless questions at each of us. I was nearly finished when my mother launched into another attack of questions. "Ruby, Maddie's mom told me that you guys have a new English teacher, is that true?" she asked. Connell and I looked up at the same time, staring at each other for a few short moments. I cleared my throat, playing with my fork. "Yeah." I went silent. "Well, what do you think of him?" "He's an asshole." I smirked. Then I glanced at my mother. "Grade A. Ill, have you know. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have something coming to him." "You're joking, of course, right, Ruby?" my mother warned, shooting me a look. I met Connell's eyes, my teeth grinding as I watched him lift an eyebrow at me. "That little asshole." Dottie let out a whine, begging me silently to let it go. I let go of my fork, pulling my napkin off of my lap and putting it on the table. "I'm tired," I said sharply. "I'm going to sleep." I stood, picking up my plate and water glass. Leaving the table with one last glance at Connell, I placed my plate in the sink and went up the stairs to my room. I collapsed onto my bed as soon as I got into my room, snuggling into my blankets. He was encroaching in my life in every possible way. I pulled my pillow to my face and screamed, hoping that they wouldn't be able to hear it downstairs. If pillows could muffle gunshots, then they could probably muffle me. After I had worn myself out, I closed my eyes and let myself be lulled to sleep. "Ruby, you're grounded," my mother told me, her arms crossed. I was chewing absent-minded on my pancakes, pouring generous amounts of syrup on every few bites. "You've already ground me, remember," I quipped back, taking another bite. My mother narrowed her eyes, her perfect eyebrows knitting together as she stared at me. I swallowed, looking at my father for help from the inevitable. "You know, honey, she's not wrong. I don't think she meant to come across so rude," my father tried weakly to defend me. I sighed, putting my chin into the palm of my hand. My father was little help in the argument area. My mother turned from me to my father, her anger changing persons. I put another fork of pancakes into my mouth, watching cautiously. My mother had come to the conclusion that I needed to be grounded for the second time, after thinking over the night. I didn't think I was that rude, but my mother thought otherwise, and it was her way or the highway. For some ungodly reason, my brother had pulled me out of bed early, and had practically forced me to get ready. This meant I had ample time to be yelled at, and eat my pancakes before heading off to school. I stood, stepping away from the table as quietly as possible. My mother's eyes found mine as soon as I reached down to grab my bag. She paused her argument with my father for a moment. "You come straight home tonight," my mother said, before looking back at my father, who was trying to combat her arguments and failing miserably. I waved goodbye as I left, but I knew they didn't see. Their arguing could be heard outside the house, only fading when I neared my car. With a huff, I unloaded my bag into the passenger seat. Before getting in, I let myself breathe. Something I had almost been neglecting. It seemed like I was always holding my breath, afraid of what was going to happen next. My attention was suddenly drawn away when I smelled vanilla. I hated that smell because it reminded me of something I couldn't have. I lifted my eyes, looking for him in the distance. A road separated my house and his, and a white picket fence lining his lawn. He was on the sidewalk, leaning against his fence as he took deep breaths. His face was red, and his body had a sheen of sweat. I shook my head when he took off his shirt. He pulled it over his head and balled it in his hands. My gaze drifted down his body, from his shoulders to his stomach. My chest ached as I looked at his V-line, only viewable because of his low shorts. I narrowed my gaze on his side when he moved. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "What is that?" I leaned forward, squinting so I could see it better. That was definitely a tattoo. It wasn't what I thought it would be, like a wolf or a dragon, anything but a cat. I was unable to stop the laugh that left my mouth. He had the worst cat I've ever seen tattooed into his side. The lines were patchy and dull, not to mention the demon eyes that cat had. I stifled another laugh and pulled out my phone, pointing it at his side. I only had a few short moments before he moved. Right now he was doing something on his phone. Within 10 seconds I had a picture of his tattoo saved in my camera roll. I pulled out of my driveway, tossing my phone onto my passenger seat. I was going the opposite way of Connell's house, but I could see his fleeting figure in my side mirror as I left. He must not have realized how late he was. Feeling confident with the time, I decided to stop by a coffee shop and get a donut. I had already eaten breakfast, but I'm a growing girl, I need nourishment. As I tapped my foot, waiting for my food, I got an idea. Pulling my phone from my bag, I logged into Hustle, a social media app that was popular around my school. Reason: anonymity. Anything could be said, posted, or shared, with complete secrecy. It was a breeding ground for rumors. True or not, nobody cared enough to fact-check. It took 3 clicks and then the photo was posted. Ouch! Rough tattoo from our favorite new asshole, Mr. Wood. Someone should tell him how bad it is. I rolled my eyes at my awful description and posted the picture, tagging my entire friend list. The good thing about Hustle was that the picture would be posted, but there would be no way to track it back to me. I got my donut soon after I put away my phone. I could hear it buzz, but I decided not to look at it. By the time I got to school, I knew it would be everywhere. That was a given. Everyone had Hustle. I drove to school slowly, my phone buzzing nonstop. I turned it off at a stoplight, and only looked at it when I pulled into my parking spot. Pulling my phone from my bag, I looked at the app one more time. The comments were about as agonizing as I figured they'd be. If I wasn't still burning from anger because of all Connell had done to me, I might have felt bad. But my one, minuscule little act couldn't even measure up to what he had done. It might have been sadistic, but I hoped he felt embarrassed about his stupid tattoo. I walked to class, observing everyone. They were all on their phones, laughing about the picture, sharing it with each other. Maddie and Sarah met me in class, hunched over one desk, staring at one of their phones. "Ruby, have you seen this?" Maddie said, giggling under her breath. She pushed her phone away from her, letting me see. The picture was getting a lot of attention. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Maddie smiled, and upon seeing her perfect white teeth, I smiled back. Her smile was contagious. "This isn't going to blow over well," Maddie said, glancing at the picture. "Everyone can't get enough of it. I'm sure he'll be fine." Sarah spoke lightly, her eyes looking off into space. Maddie and I looked at each other, eyebrows raised. "Why do you say that?" Sarah shrugged, her arms crossing. "Because he has a killer bodies that the girls will fall for." Dottie let out a low growl at the thought of other girls looking at him, but that ship had already sailed. Sarah wasn't wrong. Even though you couldn't see much in that photo, it was enough to make your mind wander. "Yeah, but what girl would want a guy with that awful tattoo permanently on their side?" Maddie said. We laughed, just as the late bell rung. He still wasn't here, the door remained open and his desk remained empty. "Maybe he saw the picture," someone said near the back of the class. "As if he has hustle," Fletcher's voice echoed the classroom. We nodded in agreement, waiting impatiently for him to show up. Kids were scattered around the classroom, many sitting on desktops, talking loudly with their friends. Some of the football players were throwing things at each other near the back of the class. I felt dull pleasure fill my bones as we slowly fell into chaos. "Ruby darling, I have a party tonight and I want you there," Fletcher said. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me into his side. Fletcher was the class clown, never failing to make me everyone else smile. We've been friends since middle school, and there was never a chance of being anything more as he came out as gay in freshman year. Fletcher loved throwing parties, and only he ever managed to pull it off. He was the golden boy of the school, star football player, valedictorian by some incredible measure. He threw parties like he was addicted to the thrill, and somehow he never got in trouble for it. I thought about the question for a few seconds, my mind going over the pros and cons. It would get my mind off of my situation for at least a night, but I was also grounded, like really grounded. Still, I found my lips twisting into a smile as I gazed up at Fletcher. "Sure, Fletch." He hugged me, before being called away by one of his friends. Fletcher's parents were the medics of our pack, but he didn't have a bone in his body like them. He gets hurt the most out of all the pack members. I heard Connell's footsteps before I saw him. Then, his blue eyes scanned the room as he made it to the door. His eyes widened for a moment as he took in the ruckus. A few days ago, we would have been sitting perfectly still, barely breathing. It wasn't that way now. The combination of him being late and the ridiculous photo that came out fueled the class into having a few minutes of courage. "What's going on in here?" Connell said loudly, shutting the door behind him as he entered. "We love your tattoo, Mr. Wood," one of the senior boys yelled out. Connell looked at us in confusion, trying to piece together what he meant. Maddie pulled up the photo, showing it to Mr. Wood. His confusion melted away as realization crossed his face. With his eyes blazing, he looked straight at me, knowing that I had to have taken the photo. Under his glare, I sunk lower into my seat, my eyes going to the floor. Connell's booming voice echoed around the room, causing everyone to go quiet. "Everyone sit down, now." It was the voice of an alpha. And a strong one. At that, I knew he was powerful, and there was no doubt from the first moment I met him that he was of alpha blood. I knew that the wolves in the room were submitting, even without looking to see. It was more of a roar, and everyone followed his instructions. My stomach knotted as I clutched my necklace, squeezing it so hard I could feel the indentations in my palm. He waited impatiently as everyone sat down, before leaning against his desk. The air in the room seemed to get thicker as we waited for him to speak. I expect more from my students than this foolish behavior. Now, I'm aware that I am a substitute, but I expect you to treat me with as much respect as you would have shown your regular teacher. Connell looked around the classroom as he said this, his voice calm and even. It was almost scary how easily he could become calm. Connell seemed to inhale slowly, before his eyes darted up. He was looking straight at me. I expect better, he said coldly, before he looked away from me. From all of you. I felt anger fill me. He was telling me to be better? You're kidding, right? I let out a breath as I looked at him, something welling in my chest. I wanted to break down in anger, to scream at him and let him know how wrong he was. The atmosphere in the room was tense as he stood up straight, walking around his desk. Macbeth, he wrote on the board. And everyone let out an uncomfortable groan. The school day seemed to drag by, but a buzz of excitement floated through the school. The news of Fletcher's party spread like AIDS. From the freshmen to the seniors, everyone knew. Connell's drama was old news by lunch, replaced with news of a freshman who flashed some boys in English. Odd. Just to show how fast high school drama changes in the blink of an eye. It always seemed to be changing. Going from one weird thing to another. It will be different tomorrow, as always. I drove home right after school ended, waving goodbye to Sarah and Maddie. They promised to come and pick me up at 4. My parents weren't going to be home until 5:30, so it was perfect for them not to know. I would just tell them later that Maddie wanted to study, and I had already made a promise to her. My house was empty and cold, causing me to crinkle my nose. It always seemed so big when everyone was gone. I ran to my room, nearly falling over Juju, my dog, who has decided to waddle his little corgi butt right in front of my feet. I turned on my heater when I got into my room, and pulled out my piles of makeup. Most of it were gifts from Maddie, who was the only one who knew how to do makeup out of all of us. I was mediocre, and Sarah didn't even bother. Foundation, eyeshadow, some glittery stuff later, and I was ready to go. I tied my hair into a ponytail, trying to flatten my fluffy hair as much as possible. It didn't work. I checked the time, tapping my feet anxiously as I watched it tick past 4. Of course they were late, it wasn't unexpected. However, it didn't help the twists of my stomach. Luckily, not long after, I heard the doorbell ring, and I sprung up. Running downstairs, I grabbed my phone and my wallet. Maddie and Sarah were both at the door. Maddie was speaking angrily to Sarah, who seemed to be staring off absently into space. Maddie couldn't scare Sarah even if she tried. When Maddie saw me walk out, she shut up, letting her arms fall from their crossed position. She gave me a small smile, looking me up and down. "Wow, you actually tried," Maddie said, motioning to my short black dress. It was loose, like a nightgown, but much sexier. I winked at her, and we both started giggling. Sarah even cracked a smile, coming back to earth. Maddie didn't say what she and Sarah were talking about, but I could only assume that Sarah said something she shouldn't have, and Maddie got mad at her. One thing about Sarah is that she can't hold her tongue. The only way she does is by not talking at all. "So what are you going to tell your mom?" Maddie asked as we walked to her car. Sarah let out a soft laugh, knowing my answer already. I happened to share my idea with her when I was in art class with her, something which Maddie was not in. "I told her I was studying with you," I said simply, and Maddie rolled her eyes. My mother would never, ever believe it. Maddie doesn't study, nor does she do her homework, or care about her grades. She had her career already lined up. She was going to take over what her parents did, and that didn't require an A+ in trig, something which she's on her second try of. "Your mama's gonna kill you," Maddie laughed, and we all started laughing. I probably shouldn't, knowing she really wasn't wrong. Still, I've survived 18 years. I can survive another night, right? As we walked to the car, I notice a certain figure coming out of their house. Dog leash in hand, and a gray husky by his side, he started down his driveway towards the sidewalk. Before I could draw their attention away from him, they spotted him. A short gasp left Maddie's mouth, and she completely stopped walking. When Sarah noticed him, even she let out a sound, though it was unidentifiable. Connell hadn't seen us, opening the gate to his fence. Maddie's brown eyes flashed to me, confusion now settled on her face. A strange look most likely crossed my face, but I couldn't really pay attention, my mind racing to find an excuse. Not necessarily because he was now living next door, but because I hadn't told them. He moved in next door, I said quickly before they could ask any questions. There was a soft breeze, making us all cross our arms. Still, our eyes didn't leave from our anchored spot on Connell. He had stopped, his dog sniffing grass. He didn't seem pleased. "Why didn't you tell us?" Maddie asked, her eyes shifting from him. She wasn't angry, just curious. "It just slipped my mind," I told her, rocking lightly on my feet. Another cold breeze passed, making the leaves ruffle on the ground, and making us all shiver in our boots. "Okay. We can continue this conversation in the car." Sarah's gentle voice pitched in, and she was soon walking towards the car. Once we got to the car, Maddie got in the front seat, and Sarah took the passenger. I was about to get in the back seat, when I felt eyes on me. Connell was staring straight at me, his eyes drifting downwards once, before going back to my face. He had a neutral look on his face, but I could tell he was affected. Good, I thought, flipping my ponytail over my shoulder. "What's wrong, Ruby? Come on." Maddie rolled down the window slightly, not bothering to look out past me. Sarah shushed her, looking out of her own window to see what was happening. Before I could get into the car, I heard the sound of my dad's truck rumble down the street. It was an obnoxious sound, and was a natural alarm for most of my neighbors. I flipped around, looking at my dad's car. He hadn't seen me yet, but he would soon. Looking back at Connell, I could tell he knew what was happening. I motioned to him not to say anything, and opened the car door, climbing inside. "Drive, drive, drive!" I shouted, barely shutting the car door before we started moving. Like a maniac, Maddie pulled out of the driveway, trying to get away before my dad saw. Luckily for us, my dad was still far down the road, which was covered by large oak trees, too many to see past. Unluckily, Connell had witnessed my distressed jump in the car, quick drive out, and was now walking towards my house, a plan in mind. I sighed, rubbing my face wearily. This was my own doing, I suppose. I not only made him mad earlier, though I retain that it was all his fault to begin with, but I had basically waived an opportunity to get back at me. I made my bed. I suppose I'll just have to lay in it. Maddie continued the conversation when we were out of the neighborhood. "So, did you take the picture?" she asked, a smirk on her face. She already knew the answer, but I gave her the pleasure in saying yes anyways. When I told her this, she let out a laugh, shaking her head. My, Ruby, you sure like keeping secrets." My breath caught, and I looked up at her. She didn't seem to think anything of what she was saying. It was just something she says on occasion. Yet to me, it made me wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. Had Zach told her, even after I asked him not to? My eyes caught Sarah's in the mirror, and she lingered, before looking away. Sarah was always good at cluing into things. I knew she wasn't quite sure what happened, but she could deduct. Maddie had to be told when anything happened, because her head was always in the clouds. Maddie turned on the radio, stopping on a 80-second station, causing us to sing "A Has Take on Me." It seemed to calm the mood, and all tension was gone quickly. Today's party location was on Washington Lake. That's Virginia for you, named after, you guessed it, George Washington. It was an overgrown lake that was normally not traveled, making it the perfect location for parties. The lake was pretty small, with sandy beaches on all sides. The water was a muddy brown, like most Virginia water. Cars were already pulled up on the outer band of the beach. Drinks were most definitely already handed out, considering the amount of people already trudging into the water. "Kind of early, don't you think?" Dottie asked me, and I rolled my eyes. Dottie was innocent, but she had seen me over the years. I couldn't exactly handle my alcohol, but I tried. "Yes, Dottie, but has that ever stopped anyone?" I answered back, and Dottie gave me a light growl. She was such a mother sometimes. "Ruby, quit talking to Dottie and come on." Maddie took me out of my trance, and I nodded, opening my car door. Maddie was well aware of Dottie, as she had an inner wolf as well. We don't share what they say, but other wolves are aware they are there, sort of like an inner conscience. As soon as our feet hit the sand, we took off our shoes. No need for those, they would only get in a way. We took our time getting into the party, and then we all split up. Sarah went one way, leaving to go and be by herself. She actually didn't care about parties, but she was interested in the scene. She would probably sketch it if she could, but instead, she just sat and observed. Maddie rocked her way straight to the alcohol, taking a cup from someone else, and downing it within a few seconds. People cheered, and her, thriving on attention, took another. I went towards the lounging group of football players and cheerleaders. I wasn't particularly popular, but I was well known in most social groups. Fletcher, being the quarterback, was nestled in the middle, slowly drinking a beer. He was never one to get wasted. He mainly just had fun watching other people get wasted. There was a boy on his arm, Sam Crowley. Sam's father was the sheriff, and Sam himself was a good boy. Never drank, never broke any rules. Well, save this whole excursion. Fletcher had a major thing for Sam, and always seemed to be doting on him. When Fletcher noticed me, he let out a whistle, moving away from Sam to stand up. Is that who I think it is? He made a point to look me up and down, then around, as though he was going to find some kind of secret, Ruby Delson, in the flesh. I rolled my eyes. He was so dramatic. I let Fletcher plant a kiss on my cheek, but rubbed it off instantly. Fletcher was a big oaf, but I loved him anyways. You look good, Ruby. A real stunner, he continued, winking at me. I stopped myself from rolling my eyes, again, and just smiled, taking the compliment. Thank you, Fletcher. Now, I think someone is missing you. I looked back to Sam, who looked longingly after Fletcher, and I have a few cups of mystery liquid to down. Fletcher let me go, and moved back to his place next to Sam. I grabbed a red Solo cup from someone who was handing them out, and let the liquid easily flow down my throat. I've always tried to hold my alcohol well, but I'm just not good at it. I get drunk quick. Maddie takes a while, but normally she's drunk quick as well. That's why we always have Sarah to fall back on. I walked around for a while, talking with people, when I noticed a boy looking at me. And by looking, I mean staring. I made eye contact with him, and instead of looking away, I just tilted my head and gave him a coy smile. He took a sip of his drink, before walking my way. I must preface this by saying I am a flirt. No way to go around that. I've always been one, and am not ashamed of it. Before Connell, I had fun because I could. I knew when I had a mate I wasn't going to be able to ever again, and I was sure I wouldn't want to. Now, it's more to fill my loneliness than anything else. I wanted to feel like myself again. Sorry I was staring. I'm just attracted to beautiful things, the boy said as soon as he reached me. Smooth. He had dark hair, blonde from what I could tell. Not like Fletcher's light blonde hair. It was thick, and went to his shoulders. I wasn't normally into long hair, but his was likable. I smiled. Good one. So, what's your name? John. Boring, I know. He shrugged, his eyes looking me up and down. I hope you aren't boring. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, but I just let them settle. They came out in a flirty way, and he reacted, taking a step forward. I can promise him not. I decided to take a breather, and looked around, trying to find an empty space. Come on, I told him, taking his wrist and dragging him out of the crowds. I grabbed another drink as I went, throwing away my cup in a trash can that we passed. Already dragging me away, and I don't even know your name. He laughed, and I winked at him. When we got to where I wanted to be, I fell to the ground, keeping my drink steady. It wasn't sand, it was just grass, which seemed much better to sit in than sand. My name's Ruby. I answered him when I got comfortable. He took a seat next to me, close enough that when he moved the slightest bit his pants would brush his legs. That's not a boring name. Then again, I'm guessing you're not a boring person? He leaned closer, and I looked away, my mouth turning up into a smile. I guess so. I took a sip of my drink, letting the burning alcohol warm me. I wondered what it was, but I figured it must be a mixture of different drinks. People like to get creative at these parties. I've never seen you before, he said, and I laughed. I could say the same about you. I know everyone in Fremont. So I would know you if you went there, I told him, taking another big gulp of my drink. Whatever was in that cup warmed my body, and I felt myself loosening up. Seems like it was starting to kick in. You would be right. I go to St. John's. I lifted an eyebrow, letting out a hum. St. John's was the only Christian school near our town, and it was actually a town over. It was not only preppy, but very strict. If he was caught going to a party, he could be kicked out of school. You certainly are daring. How'd you hear about this party? I asked, looking away from him towards the crowds. I noticed a mix of St. John's and Fremont kids. I hadn't noticed before, being too interested in the drinks than the people. Someone invited someone from St. John's, and it seemed like an open invitation. John told me. And I nodded. It wasn't Fletcher, he only invited people from Fremont. Even so, he let anyone who was willing come. We were silent for a while. Me people watching. And him watching me. I always get red-faced when people pay solo attention to me. Don't get me wrong, I love attention, but when it's just one person paying attention to me, it makes me nervous. He made me nervous. Not in the "I'm going to kill you" kind of nervous, but in the just natural, boy kind of nervous. I knew what I was doing was technically wrong. Dottie was constantly growling at me, so I tuned her out. I'm sure the moon god is frowning down on me. Hey, you matched me with the worst possible guy. So this is what you get. Every time John moved closer, as though he was going to kiss me, I got a feeling in my stomach, and I could see Connell. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I could only think as I tried to focus, this man is ruining my life. I'm going to go get another drink, I said suddenly, standing. John looked at me curiously as I stumbled back down to the party, my feet digging in the sand. He waited there as I got another drink, drank half of it in one go, and then came back to him. I didn't want to care about Connell anymore, so as I finished off my drink, not even enjoying it, I knew I was getting there. Was this what I was going to do whenever I wanted to forget? That sounds depressing. Do you have a boyfriend? John asked, and I nearly choked on my drink. What a question to ask someone you've just met. No, I want to say, I've got something more, something you'll never understand, something I probably won't ever understand either. Instead, I give him the simple answer, no. He nods, his brown eyes looking into mine. My skin crawls. In a good way or bad, I'm not even sure. Suddenly, he leans forward, and his lips crash into mine. When John kissed me, I felt all the anger I had towards Connell all come in at once. I was angry at how carelessly he tossed me to the side. And so, I kissed him back, ferociously. He seemed surprised by this, but responded accordingly, kissing back. We were in a war over power. I pushed him down, my lips devouring his. He didn't taste good, he tasted like how I'm sure I taste. Bad quality alcohol. There were no sparks. With Connell, there would have been sparks. That's what Maddie said was going to happen. Not anymore though. John was demanding, only stopping to breathe for a short second. I barely had time to gasp for a breath before he lowered his lips to mine again. Boys, I thought distastefully as my anger started to flood away. What's wrong? I thought. I wanted this, didn't I? I led him on. I basically put myself out there to the world. Yet now, I didn't want to do it anymore. He put a hand on my thigh, and started to travel my dress. Suddenly, my mind went in hyperdrive, and I shoved his hand away, breaking the kiss. Before I could say anything else, there was a loud wail of a siren, and immediate reaction from the crowds. People immediately started talking, and when the police cars came into view, they started running. I didn't look back at John as I started running towards the crowd, trying to find Maddie or Sarah. I didn't find either in the midst of pushing, drunk teens. My head hurt, and I could feel my vision go in and out. Drunk, yes. I was utterly drunk. I was also confused, trying to find my way out of the mess. When I finally burst out of the crowds, I just happened to be at the wrong side, and was face to face with a cop. Miss Bell was a werewolf, and also a cop. She kept an eye on the safety of the wolves from a different position than just warriors, and she kept us safe. When she recognized me, drunk off my heels and stumbling, she frowned, and moved forward, grabbing my elbow with her hand. I stumbled as she took me towards her car, shaking her head as she go. "Why I never... Your daddy's going to be angry when I pull up with you." She opened the back of her police car's door, and ushered me in. Her southern accent was clear, and over-exaggerated. It happened when she gets mad at someone. It was so quick, I completely forgot about the fact that I didn't have any shoes. My head was already hurting as we drove towards my home, half from her constant angry spouting, and when she was quiet, she was silently seething, glaring at me through the mirror. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down my head and my stomach. "It's not that big of a deal," I tried to console myself. Yet, it was. My parents were going to ground me for life. We pulled up to my house too soon for my liking, and she dragged me out of the car. I hung onto her arm, saying nonsensical words, dragging my feet as we walked up the sidewalk to my porch. I stumbled as I was pushed along, trying to sharpen my focus, but failing miserably to do so. "This sucks," was all I could think. "You're lucky I picked you up and not one of those other officers, Miss," Belle said as she helped me up the stairs. Her features softened as she looked down at me. Miss Belle cared too much for her own good, and that's why I liked her. Her caramel eyes left me, and she knocked on the door, 3 times, 3 hard knocks, and my heart sank. My mother opened the door, her eyes filled with fire. She must have seen me come up in the driveway, and was just waiting for us to get to the door. I looked away from her blue eyes, and down towards the ground, defeated. My father stood, arms crossed in the background. When my mother opened the door, disappointed, and ready to yell, I realized how different we really were. She would have never gone out to a party when she was a teen. She would have stayed home and studied. She always knew what she wanted to be, and she did everything possible to reach her goal. I'm just not like her. But I am, in so many ways, aren't I? Too many ways, if you ask me. So as I felt the tension in the room, but I also felt something else, fear. They were scared, as they always were when I went out. Scared I wouldn't come back. That's how parents are, and that's how they are. I felt bad, but when did I not? It felt like I was always feeling bad for one thing or another. "Ruby Delson, you get in this house this instant." My mother's strong voice snapped me out of my long rambling daydream. She was the head of the house, and everyone knew it. I stumbled into the house, and I was immediately filled with a sense of calm. Vanilla, it was all over. On the couch sat Connell, reading a book, uncaring of the situation. He only looked up from his book when I walked into the living room and collapsed on the couch across from him, groaning as I did so. He was victorious, and it made me mad. What made me even more mad was that he didn't flaunt it. I would have. Instead, he just sat there, patiently waiting for my parents to chew me out. "I hate you. Where were you? What were you thinking? What did you do? Answer me." My mother was stressed, asking continuous questions but getting no answers back. I shrugged, letting my hair fall around my face, shielding my eyes. I put my hands under my thighs to stop them from shaking. "Do you know how it feels to have my daughter hauled home in a cop's car, drunk off her rocks?" I wanted to tune out, but I stopped myself. "I dug this grave. Can't crawl out now." Connell was silent, watching my mother yell. His hand tightened around his book as every word, before going slack as he put down the book altogether. "Sorry," was all I could say when she stopped talking. I was going in and out of awareness, my brain not working all the way. My mother was silent, and she turned to Miss Bell. "Thank you, Angel. I don't know how to repay you," my mother said, taking Miss Bell's hand. Miss Bell smiled gently, patting my mother's hand. "It's okay. Anything to keep her safe." Miss Bell took her leave, and I sat in silence as my parents talked with each other. I put my chin in the palm of my hand, closing my eyes. When I opened them, I noticed Connell staring back at me, his blue eyes studying my face. He didn't seem to care that I saw him. In fact, he just kept watching me. My mother noticed that I was about to fall asleep, and angrily sighed, rubbing her hand tiredly on her forehead. "Mr. Wood, will you take Ruby up to her room? It's the last door on the right." My mother turned around to quietly argue with my father once again. He was probably trying to defend me, that's what he always did. He was normally more in tune with me than my mother. Connell stood slowly and walked around the coffee table, stopping when he got to me. I tried to get away from him, attempting to stand. I only ended up falling back down into the couch, a grunt leaving my mouth as my breath was knocked out of me. "Silly girl," Connell mumbled to himself, leaning down to pick me up. One of his arms went under my legs, while the other went around my waist to secure me. He held all my weight with ease, seeming to have no problem. Of course, my parents didn't notice as he walked to the stairs, straight past them. He went up the steps, slowly, carefully. I found myself falling asleep in his arms as I was lulled back and forth as we went. I was too tired to open my eyes, but I could hear him open the door to my room. I didn't even open my eyes when I was jerked suddenly. I only heard him swear. He must have stepped on something. He placed me on my bed carefully, pushing my covers back, and then pulling the blankets back on me. I rolled around, finally turning in his direction. I could hear his breathing as he looked at me, and then as he looked around the room. Dottie was happy for his closeness, savoring it. My mind went heavy and clouded as I was on the brink of falling asleep. Before I went completely, I heard his jacket crinkle as he moved, leaning down. He pushed back the hair on my face. The last thing I felt before I was completely asleep was him rubbing his thumb on my cheek. The last thing I heard was him walking away. I woke up with a painful headache, and my parents once again yelling at me. I buried my face in my pillow as they yelled, nearly falling asleep once again. I couldn't fall asleep though. Not anymore. The verdict in my house was that I was going to be grounded for a month. No more, no less. It was surprising. Normally it would be much longer. But I found when I stumbled downstairs that there was another issue floating around my house. One that held a much more important status. Her birthday is on Monday. I stopped halfway down the stairs, pushing myself against the wall so I could listen. I knew what they were talking about. And it wasn't about me. I frowned as I closed my eyes, heightening my senses so that I could hear with utmost clearness. I could hear my mother sigh. It was a pained sigh. And upset sigh. I tugged at my necklace, wrapping my fingers around the ring. It was hers. Once. Before. I know. Ruby's going to have a tough time. She always does. My mother answered back. She was probably looking towards the stairs, thinking about me in my room. I could hear my pulse in my ears as I strained to listen. I was too hungover for this. "Why don't we send a letter to her parents?" My father was always an optimist, always wanting to do the right thing. "They don't deserve a letter," my mother snapped back, and my father sighed in response. I wanted to tell her that she was right, but I couldn't find my voice. My parents went silent for a few fleeting moments, and then my mother talked again. She was more ours than theirs. I felt my eyes welling as I took a deep breath, letting my hands fall from my necklace. "Mecca." I opened my eyes and swallowed. My throat was starting to constrict as I started to remember. Shaking my head, I calmed myself down, before walking completely downstairs. My mom was turned away from my dad, chopping up a banana for her fruit bowl. She turned to me when I got downstairs, and gave me a slight smile. She was thinking about too many things to be continuously mad at me. I gave her a smile back, and went to hug my dad, who was reading a newspaper. He gave me a kiss on my head, and asked how I was feeling. "Good," I lied, pushing myself up onto the stool next to him. We had a kitchen island and bar stool on one side. That's where my dad liked to sit and eat breakfast every morning. My mother put a bowl of fruit in front of me, and I started eating graciously. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. "I'm going to go to the store to get some groceries. Do you want to come, Ruby?" my mother asked, cleaning up the mess she made. I shook my head, shoving another spoonful of fruit into my mouth. I used to love go grocery shopping when I was 9. My mother already knew the answer before I said it, so she left soon after that. My father followed, saying he had some work he had to do. When they were gone, I cleaned up my bowl and decided I needed to go for a run. Dottie had been neglected for too long and was itching to have control. I had a box behind a shed that I put my clothes in when I shift, so I stripped and put them in it. The shift was painful, more so than usual. My fault, since I hadn't shifted in so long. My wolf was a spotted brown and black wolf. My parents both had solid coats, and I just had a mixture of both of them. I was small but not too small, just average. Small for alpha blood though. The woods behind my house went back as far as you could run. They went into Royal Grove, a huge natural park. It was often frequented by people, so I tended to stay in the proximity of my house. As I ran, Dottie slowly took over. She enjoyed being in wolf form, much more than when in human form. It's because you do stupid things in human form, she'd always say. She wasn't wrong. I just sat back and let her do what she wanted, until I got a whiff of something. It smelled sweet and familiar. Taking back control, I put my nose to the ground, taking a deep breath. Vanilla. Everywhere. It was everyone. I hadn't noticed because I wasn't in control, but now I couldn't think about anything else. He had been everywhere. In my woods. Mine. I angrily snarled to myself, lifting my head as I narrowed my eyes, looking in the layers of the trees. He was here. I could feel it. Did he know I was here too? Probably. I took a few careful steps forward, straining my ears once again to listen. I could hear the leaves fall from the trees, and the sound of distant animals stepping on sticks, but not a wolf. He came up from the side, quiet and meticulous. How had I not heard him? I could only figure his training had been intense. His wolf was large and a warm caramel color. He stalked forward slowly, looking me over to make sure I was not a threat. Once he figured out who I was, he went out of danger mode and stood up straighter. I growled at him, staking my dominance. What dominance? I wanted to laugh at myself. He just looked down at me, unaffected. I wanted to yell at him that this was my territory, and that he was intruding, but I couldn't. I growled again, this time angrier. This time, he growled back, much more ferociously. His growl was loud, and it made me whimper. It wasn't out of fear. I wasn't sure I would ever fear him. I wasn't sure why I did it. After I whimpered, he went quiet, his eyes studying me. I could feel the atmosphere change from tense to something else. I even thought I saw something flash in his eyes, regret. It was gone in seconds though, and he turned to leave. He was going in the way of my house, our houses, so I followed him. He was a few meters ahead of me, and he walked at a steady pace. When we got to the clearing behind our houses, I veered away from him, going to my shed. I peered behind me, and he was nowhere in sight, so I changed back into my human form. Dottie was silent, just as she was when he growled at us. I got my clothes on quickly, making sure that he was nowhere in sight. Somewhere in me, there was a feeling that I wanted him to see. Maybe hell like me then. I brushed off the thought as I tied my shoes. When I walked into the clearing, I saw him. He was bent down, messing with something on the ground. It was flowers, that were severely dead. Not his fault, they've been dead since before he moved in. The real estate agent in charge of the house had put flowers up, but they were never watered. The wind blew gently, carrying my scent with it. When it reached him, he looked up, his eyes finally reaching me. As always, he looked neutral. I wasn't as nice, giving him a nasty glare. Angry, yes. I was very angry. Angry at him, angry at life. Some might say I'm just being angsty. He glared back at me, standing up straight. My eyes traveled down, and I lost my glare as I saw that he had no shirt. No. Shirt. I know a new thing about Connell now. Under those button-ups he wears, he had abs. He was also tan, which made me wonder how often he didn't wear a shirt. Do all English teachers have abs? He noticed me staring, and he cracked a smile. Yes, that's right. Connell smiled at something. With a huff, I turned on my heel, leaving quickly. My face burned, and I hoped he hadn't seen. Of course he had to see me ogling him though. I wanted to make him want me, not look like I want him. When I got to my door, I looked towards his house one last time, and for a brief moment, our eyes met once again, and then we both turned away. Some people have a natural beauty, inside and out. I'd say Mecca was one of those people. She had a sort of sensitivity. She knew what people meant, no matter what they said. She cared about everyone else much more than she cared about herself. Sometimes she cared too little about herself, that it was concerning. She's been gone for 6 years. 6 years is a long time to be gone. She left so suddenly. Sometimes it feels as though we didn't say goodbye at all. In a lot of ways, we didn't. Her birthday was always a fun occasion. If anything, I liked it more than my own. We would go get ice cream, even though she was lactose intolerant. Then she'd take me on a run, even though I stumbled and she had much better things she could be doing. But today, it seemed far too solemn. My parents were gone, already off to work. They let me stay home, but figured it would be better to distract themselves than face what had happened. Zach went out with his friends, trying to find his own form of distraction. Maddie and Sarah were sad themselves, so they had a sleepover. They invite me every year, and every year I decline. We all had our own ways of coping, and mine was more of a solo act. I woke up later than normal. My body felt heavy as I realized what day it was, and I couldn't pull myself out of bed for a long time. It's almost as though she's dead, even though I truly believe she's not. Juju seemed unaffected by my troubles, barking over and over outside my door to force me out of bed. Once I got to the door, he stopped barking, and looked at me with his big puppy eyes. Was that necessary? I cooed as I bent down to pick him up. I hugged him to my chest, sighing as I tried to clear my head. Walking downstairs, I got a quick bowl of cereal, and I thought about what I wanted to do. Normally, I just sulked around all day, which I felt as though would be my plans once again. Letting out a deep breath, I looked at my surroundings, trying to draw inspiration. Just as I was about to give up, the door to my backyard caught my eye. Yes, fresh air. A natural healer, I think. My backyard is medium-sized, with a white picket fence enclosing it. We have a patio when you step out the door, which has a few outdoor chairs, a grill, and a fire pit. A few stray trees shade the outmost part of the backyard, and my treehouse was located in the biggest tree. I sat in one of the lounge chairs as I soaked in the sun, letting a sigh leave my lips. Maybe I just needed to relax. Naturally, I'm not good at relaxing, so I opened my eyes to look around. The leaves had almost all fallen from the trees, which made the ground colored. There was a gentle breeze, which had a bite of cold, making me shiver. Perhaps this wasn't the best idea. Trying to shake it off, I looked around some more. I could see Connell's house across the way, his backyard in view of mine. It was a wreck, product of it being left alone for so long. A satisfied hum left my mouth as I smile, closing my eyes once again and tilting back my head to the Sunday serves him right. I sat like that for a few long moments, before I started to look around once more. My eyes finally settled on my treehouse. My parents built it when my brother was a kid, so I've never known a time when it wasn't there. I haven't been in it for years though, a depressing outcome of growing up. Standing from my chair, I slowly walked to the tree, looking up. Of course younger me tied up the rope in the treehouse, thinking climbing the tree was more fun. Letting out a irritated sigh, I grabbed onto one of the branches, ranking myself up. My feet found their place in familiar grooves, and my mind seemed to fill in the gaps. I made my way up the tree in no time, and though I struggled to get the door open, I managed it in the end. The treehouse was small, smaller than I remember. "You're not 12 anymore," Dottie mumbled to me. I shook my head, pulling myself through the hole completely, and shutting the door and latch. There was a small wooden hole that served as the window, homemade shutters latched to stop critters from entering. Oak shelves lined the walls, random toys and books resting on them. There was a beanbag chair, a small pink rug, and a small bed, all below the shelves. I sat on the bed, running my hands on the cover, A long time ago, it was Mecca's, her home away from home. It seemed as though she was in this bed then her own. I stood up from the flowered covers and looked at the items that lined the walls. Silly bands, a Jonas Brothers CD, a pair of two small fake Uggs. I found a smile tracing my lips, my mood lifting. Perhaps this was a good idea. I stayed in the treehouse for a few more minutes, examining everything I could find. Once I had looked at everything and stuffed a few prized possessions in my pocket, I decided it was probably time to leave. Something caught my eye under Mecca's bed before I had a chance though. Frowning, I got on my knees, looking under the bed. In the very far corner, pushed all the way against the wall, was a small silver box. I groaned as I reached for it, my fingers barely touching it, but giving me a good enough grip to pull it towards me. When I got it out, I held it to my chest, standing. Sitting on the bed, I examined the box. There was a small clasp, which was easily flipped up. I forced the stuck box open, looking inside. It was filled to the brim with notes, trinkets, random things. A laugh left my mouth as I lifted up a small plush monkey. Squeezing it, it started singing Happy Birthday in an annoyingly hyper voice. I had given it to Mecca years before. I started to recognize other things. Notes my friends and I had written her. A cheap necklace from her first boyfriend. A bottle opener that she used for root beer. I knew she was sentimental, but I was impressed. I emptied the box quickly, looking at everything once over, before setting them on the bed. I was about to set the box aside, when I noticed one last thing in the box. There was a crumbled letter in the bottom of the box, my name scrawled in Mecca's neat writing on the smooth side. My curiosity piqued as I pulled it out, tossing the box to the side. I flipped the crinkled letter in my hand, my nail going under the sealed opening. Ripping it open, I pulled out a piece of paper. Dear Ruby, I wish I could tell you this in person, but it isn't possible, and I don't have much time. I never thought that this would happen, and sometimes I wish I'd have better luck. I can't do anything more now than hope for the best. I can't tell you everything, even if I want to. I've gotten myself into trouble, and the only way I think I can fix it is by leaving. The ring that I'm going to give you is very powerful, and all you need to know is that you have to keep it safe. Basically, don't lose it. If someone gets a hold of it, it will cause massive problems. No one else has my confidence to take care of it. I'm going on the run, and I hope to be in Louisiana before your mom and dad realize I'm gone. My parents too, of course, but I figure they wouldn't care all that much. Someone's after me, and it would be better if I led them away. I've caused this trouble. I have to try to fix it. Please take care, Ruby. One day, I'll be with you again. Love, Mecca. I felt tears fill my eyes as I took a deep breath, folding the letter close. I didn't understand. She had told me very little when she left. The basics. That she was sorry and that she couldn't explain. She removed her ring, forced it in my hand, and gave me a kiss on the cheek before leaving. She didn't even look back. I sat there, processing what I read. I had so many questions that I knew would go unanswered. She left 6 years ago, so there was a slim chance that I could ever find her. My hand went to my ring, letting it fall into the palm of my hand so I could examine it. I thought it was normal enough. It was a thin silver band, with engraved vines on the outside, and inscribed words on the inside. I could never figure out what the words said, considering they were in another language, and I soon lost interest. I never wore the ring because it was too big for me at the time, and to be honest, I never felt like it was mine to wear. I put everything back in the box, leaving out the letter, and then kicked the box under the bed. It cracked against the wood with a bang, and then the treehouse was silent once again. Forcing the door of the treehouse open, I untied the rope ladder and let it fall, not willing to put my life on climbing down the tree without falling. Within a few moments I was down the tree, letter stuffed in my back pocket. When I was safely inside my house, I pulled out the letter, looking it over once more. For once my mind was completely free of Connell, though it was full with another type of darkness. I looked over the letter over and over, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? My parents were torn enough over what had happened, so telling them right now wasn't an option. I knew if I told them they'd drop everything to go off and find her, even though there was a small chance we ever could. After all, we only had one thing: Louisiana. And that was not much at all. I folded up the note and put it in the bottom of my underwear drawer. No one goes in there but me. Once it was safely hidden under mismatched bras, I let out a sigh and collapsed on my bed. A normal day would be very appreciated. It's a normality in my household for me to wake up late, so when I woke up early, hell nearly froze over. Cuddled with the fact that it was a Wednesday, my laziest day, my parents were very suspicious. I woke up without an alarm, or my brother yelling at me. It was dark, the moon still bright in the sky. It would be a full moon in a few days, which I tried to push out of my mind. Dottie was still sleepy when I dragged myself out of bed. I hadn't looked at the time, figuring it was late as always. It was only when I pulled back my curtains and saw the moonlit darkness that I realized something was off. The time on my clock indicated I had an hour and a half to get ready for school. Normally it'd have 20 minutes, so this was a pleasant surprise. I wasn't sure the speed of which to get ready, since I knew I didn't have to go turbo speed like normal. Then sparked a brilliant idea. Connell was going to want me. I spread my makeup on my counter, looking at the brushes and bottles in desperation. I needed this to go well. Concealer, foundation, some watery stuff, some pink stuff, it all seemed to fit as I applied, and by the end, I was impressed with myself. I didn't look half bad. Picking out a dress was hard, but I ended up going with a white dress that was cinched at the waist and flowed down to my thighs. How pure! Dottie snorted. I snapped back at her in my head as I tried to find shoes. My hair was a mess, as always, so I decided to just put it in Dutch braids. Even when I was done with that, I still had time to leisure around. Everyone was already downstairs talking, and just like Saturday, I could hear them talking in hushed whispers to each other. My parents seemed to be questioning Zach about something, so I stepped back a few steps so I could safely listen. Honey, we just want to help Ruby, so if you know what's going on with her, just please tell us. My mother pleaded Zach. Her voice had an undertone of urgency. I closed my eyes, trying to listen closer. He wouldn't tell, would he? He promised he wouldn't, and I trusted him with my life. But what if he did because he thought it would help me? He sighed. Mom, I'm not the one to tell you what's happening with her. She just wants space right now. My mother wasn't pleased with that answer, sighing. She was pacing from one side of the kitchen to the other, a habit I inherited. She seems fine, honestly, Mom. I think you're just overreacting. My brother's voice faded off, and I could tell he was trying to sound convincing. He wanted to help me, I knew. And I also knew that he felt completely useless keeping it to himself. For me, though, that was what I felt was necessary. I decided to end his misery and went down the stairs, a smile on my face. My father looked up from his paper as I walked in, shock cast on his face. Isn't it weird when your family finds it shocking that you're awake early? My brother was leaning against the kitchen counter, his arms crossed and a contemplative look on his face. Hello, family, I grinned as I walked in, checking the time on the clock as I walked towards the table. There was nothing there, product of me being so early, which was good, because I wasn't actually planning on eating anything. My mother stopped mid-step, her mouth opening slightly. When she came back to her senses, she blinked a few times and started to look confused. Well, I'm going to be off. I didn't want to drag on the ordeal any longer, so I turned towards the door, only taking a few steps before a voice stopped me. Ruby, honey, you've not eaten anything. My mother stopped me, her voice laced with concern. I wasn't hungry, just nervous. Sharply turning, I gave my mom my heartbreaker smile, which she usually rolls her eyes at, and responded, I'm not hungry. Once again I turned away, this time finally leaving. Before I got out the door, I heard my father say something. At least we know she's not pregnant. There was a fleeting moment, and then a loud groan as my mother hit my father. Since it was so early, I got to school in record time. The road were impeded, and the sun barely peeked up over the skyline. I drank some ice water, fearing an energy crash, The school had a few cars scattered about. The teacher's parking lot was a quarter full. I knew that most teachers arrived at the last possible moment. The student parking lot had a few cars, with more pulling in. Early risers, I thought distastefully. Sure, at this current moment I was one, but that wouldn't last for more than one morning. The ability to wake up early on a regular basis was unfound to me. I sat in my car for a while, people watching. It was fascinating, the people who came in early. A multitude, stereotypical nerds, athletes coming to practice before school. Regular people who had nothing better to do. When I figured it would be a good time to walk in, I smoothed down my dress, grabbed my bag, and stepped out of my car. There was an instant regret for not bringing a jacket. I had completely forgotten, and my mother was so shocked at me coming down so early, she forgot to force me into an ugly jacket. The inside of school was about as vacant as the outside. The snobby office lady was still there, an uninterested look on her face as she ignored someone standing in front of her. Normally, I was that person, asking for an attendance slip. I stopped by Maddie, Sarah, and Iz's joint locker, switching out books, before going to English. I stopped 2 doors away from the classroom, peeking around a corner like an idiot to see if he was in there. His lights were on, and after taking a few deep breaths, I could smell his scent. I went forward a door, and peered a little further in to make sure no one else was in the classroom. Once I was sure, I took a deep breath, and nodded. Walking forward, you know the feeling of instant regret? That's what I felt as soon as I stepped through the door. What was the point? I was trying to convince the man, who had broken my wolfy heart, took like me. It felt almost pitiful, but I didn't have enough time to think about that as I went past the point of return. I decided to shelf my uncertainty, and put on my bravest face, walking as nonchalantly as I could to my desk. The steady beat of his pen stopped as his gaze burned into me. My cheeks started to heat up as I walked to my seat. Once I sat down, he continued writing, his eyes once again on his paper. Frustrated, I crossed my arms, looking at him intensely. I knew he most likely wouldn't look up, since he was purposefully looking away. What had I done wrong? I knew that I was a try-hard, which I was sure every girl was at some point. We all want to impress someone sometime, but even now I was confused to how little attention he paid me. Shaking off the feeling, I watched him a bit more, uncrossing my arms to lean forward. I think I was more uncomfortable than him as I stared daggers into him, my eyes going from his athletic frame, back to his face. Finally, he glanced up, unable to deny my aggressive leer. When our eyes met, he seemed taken aback, taking me in fully. I wasn't sure if he was looking at my dress, or at the fact that I looked like a psychopath. "What are you doing?" he asked when he was brought back to reality. I gave my best coy smile, my fingers curling around my hair. "What do you mean?" I evaded his question, tilting my head. Whenever I did that, I felt like a dog, but I was told it was cute. He said nothing, just blinking as he watched my face. My stomach twisted as he put down his pen, his other hand going through his curly brown hair. "This isn't like you," he said simply. And I felt myself get angry. As if he would know. I stood from my seat, leaning further over my desk. "Like you don't know anything about me," I snapped, my voice cracking halfway through. A small, somber laugh left my mouth as I crossed my arms over my chest. "Not that you want to," I muttered bitterly under my mouth. Something in Connell's eyes changed, and he was about to say something before he was interrupted by another student walking in. I sat before they could look up from the phone they were glued to. Connell closed his mouth and frowned, looking back at the papers he had before him. A shaky sigh left my mouth as I tightly closed my eyes, calming myself. Dottie was silent, retreating back to where I couldn't reach her. Class started half an hour later. Maddie and Sarah had plenty of questions, which I dodged the best I could. Fletcher put a wet kiss on my cheek, jokingly winking at me as he went to join his boyfriend in the back of the class. I shook my head, my eyes wandering to the front of the classroom where Connell sat with an unpleasant face. It looked as though he had just bitten into a lemon. I stifled a laugh as my spirits rose, and I decided to join my friends in their conversation. It was AEP time, which was basically free time before class. My mind was clear for most of the class, as I chose to simply ignore Connell. My entire plan had gone out of the window in less than a minute. It wasn't a very good plan to begin with. Dottie's sassy voice was well welcomed, and I was surprised by her comeback rate. It seemed like she was getting better every day. "Shush, Dottie," I poked back, and Dottie let out a dog-like bark. I finished work with speed I didn't even know I had, and just sat around, looking at everything but Connell for the rest of class. We weren't allowed to have phones in class after the cat incident. When we were packing up, Connell's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Delson, please stay behind." My heart nearly stopped as I completely froze, my hands halfway in my bag as I was looking for my math homework that I didn't do. I glanced up, to a completely unfazed classroom, and a occupied Connell. I was hoping I was just hearing things, but it was once again resaid as I went to leave. Dragging my feet, I walked to one of the front desks, sitting down on it slowly. He looked up from his papers, his eyes stern. "I'm not going to take back my assumptions," he said once the last person had left. My eyebrows furrowed as I leaned back, trying to remember our previous conversation. "Whatever you're trying to do, or trying to get at, isn't going to work," he finished, his eyes watching my faces closely. Behind his eyes I knew there was emotion he was hiding. I just couldn't figure out what kind. On the outside, he looked as stone cold as one could be. "How could you be so cruel?" I whimpered, my eyes narrowing as I stood, hatred flowing through my veins. I took a gasping breath, before shaking my head and walking to the door. There was no protest. Yet I stopped at the doorframe. "You're such an asshole, and you don't even see it." I just wanted an apology. I left right after, feeling victorious for getting the last word. I might have fibbed just a bit about my motives, but he didn't have to know that. I hoped it hurt. I once again saw my sadistic tendencies, and tried to shove them into a corner. Maybe sadistic tendencies were just teenage tendencies? I skipped the rest of class, telling my friends that I was feeling sick. They didn't think much of it, knowing I had been having a rough few weeks. The drive home took a quick few minutes, and not long after I was bundled up in my shaggy blankets, snugly asleep. It was evening when I woke up from my nap. The sky was turning a bruised purple, with a soft mix of pastels. Not that I could pay attention to that, because all I could pay attention to was the uncomfortable heat. Sitting up, I kicked the blankets off of me, getting off my bed. My skin was sticky and hot, making me groan as I tried to cool off. Tying my hair into a bun, I opened my window and leaned out, taking a deep breath. The cold air nipped at my face and neck. Before the effect was lost, nothing seemed to work. The heat spread through my body, and I could feel my skin getting red. Soon it became unbearable, causing me to shed my clothes. My room was suffocating me as I tried gasping for breaths, though it was to no avail, because I could never catch my breath. I filled up my bathtub with cold water, and got in as soon as possible, breathing heavily. Hastily, I submerged myself in the water, holding my breath. Just like the window, it had a short-term effect, before completely diminishing. Staying like that for a few moments, I tried to get the heat out of my mind, but alas, it was all I could think about. It was starting to hurt. Sitting up, I grabbed the sides of the tubs and yelled at the top of my lungs for Zach. "Zach!" I screamed, my voice cracking halfway through. My body was on fire, and I felt as though I was naked in the savannah. On my fifth plea, I heard my bedroom door swing open, and my brother run in. He stopped at the bathroom door, his eyes looking towards the ceiling. Through blurry eyes I could see his bronzed skin and curly hair, and a warmth of familiarity flooded through me. For a second, I felt the relief of knowing I was going to be safe. "Ruby, what's wrong?" he asked urgently, his hand going to cover his eyes as he turned slightly away from me. I couldn't speak. I could only cry out in pain. Zach's expression changed to shock as he heard me cry, before going back to alarmed. Zach didn't understand, but he tried to help anyways. Blindly walking forward, he patted around for a towel, knocking over my trash can. Once he found what he was looking for, he opened it, and tossed it over me. Before I could rip it off, he reached down to hold it on me, opening his eyes. I tried to fight him, but I was too weak, only slipping in the tub. Another wail was ripped from my lips as my tears started to fall. Though I wouldn't say I cried a lot, it seemed as though I'm always crying as of late. "What's wrong, Ruby?" he demanded once again, shaking me as he tried to get an answer. My sobs became quiet, and I couldn't pay much attention, my mind fading in and out. "It burns," was all I managed to choke out. Zach looked distressed, not knowing what to do. I cried for a bit longer, until the fatigue took over. My body became heavy and weak, and I became quiet. Silently, I closed my eyes, taking deep breaths. The last thing I could hear was Zach calling my name. I woke up to the soft murmur of my parents. I couldn't focus on what they were saying, but the first voice to become clear was Zach. He was talking in a rushed voice to my parents, worry laced into his voice. She just started screaming, saying she was hot," Zach said. My mother and father were talking over each other, arguing. "Are you sure?" my mother asked Zach, confused. "Mom, I've said it 7 times. That's all that happened." My mother let out a sigh, and I felt her cool hand touch my forehead. I furrowed my eyebrows, letting out a groan as I tried to open my eyes. When I did, I was immediately met by the worried faces of my parents. The sun had gone down, and it seemed to be quite a bit later. I guess I slept much longer than I thought. My mother, I presume, had put me in my strawberry pajamas. I had blankets tucked in all around me, as well as an freezing ice pack on my forehead. Slowly moving my hand to my forehead, I took off the ice pack, which was starting to make my head ache. "Ruby baby, how do you feel?" my mom asked as soon as I focused, moving my hair from my face. Her eyes were soft and concerned, and she was in full force mother mode. "Fine." My voice cracked, and my brother moved to hand me a water bottle. With difficulty I opened it, chugging half of it down in one go right after. I felt better after that, finally able to really understand what was happening. I'd never had something like that happen before, so I had as many questions for my parents as they had for me. "Do you remember what happened?" my dad asked, coming to sit by my side. His calloused hand grabbed mine, squeezing. My father was never good at comforting people, but I appreciated the effort. Once I thought back and collected my thoughts, I answered him. It was almost hard to remember what happened, but I had a brief understanding. "I don't know. I woke up really hot. I tried to cool myself off, but nothing worked. So I went to the bath." I spoke slowly, looking up at my ceiling. "It started to hurt, so I called for Zach." My mother looked troubled, just as Zach had earlier. Seeing her look like that made my stomach turn. One of the worst things is knowing your parents don't know what to do. Looking away from me, my mother looked at my father, her mouth turning into a frown. My father shook his head, squeezing my hand once again. "It's not possible," was all he said. My mother just looked back to me, her frown changing into a gentle smile. I wasn't sure if the expression on my face was confused or worried as well. "Ruby, we need you to be honest," my mother started, her voice quivering. She was having a hard time collecting her thoughts, it seemed. My stomach twisted as I looked at her, unsure what to do since she was acting so vulnerable. "Did you find your mate?" My eyes widened, and all I could do was stay quiet. Swiftly, I looked at Zach, who seemed as shocked as I. It seemed like he hadn't said anything. I knew I couldn't hide it any longer, and I just had to believe there was reason for it coming out. I was having trouble keeping the secret, anyways. With burning eyes, I looked back at them. I couldn't speak, so all I did was nod. My mom let out a sharp breath, her hand going to her mouth. My father stood, my hand slipping from his and falling to my side. I saw my mom's eyes fill with tears, and I saw her choke them back, trying to calm herself. "Baby, did he reject you?" I blinked, and felt myself get upset. It seemed that everything I was trying to avoid was weaseling its way deeper into my life. My mother got the signals, and reached for me, hugging me tightly. We were only interrupted by my dad's angry voice as he stomped around my room. "That bastard! I'm going to kill him!" he growled, his inner wolf begging to come out. It wasn't often I'd seen him like that. In fact, I'd only seen it a few times. "Sit down, Walter." my mother snapped with strong ferocity. My father let out a noise, before sitting down in a chair near my door, his arms crossed. While he cooled down, my brother took his place at my side. He stroked my hair, which normally would earn him a swift kick in the jewels, but I decided it was okay. Just this once. Is this what you were hiding, Zach? My mother asked Zach. She wasn't angry, she just wanted to know. My brother nodded, apologizing soon after. Shaking her head, my mom just hugged Zach and sat on the other side of him. We sat in silence for a few moments, before my mother spoke out again. You went into heat. That's why you started feeling how you felt. When a woman is rejected by their mate, the soul fights for its other half. If it can't reach it, it will go into a period of extreme heat, my mother said carefully, making sure I understood. I grimaced as she talked, thinking it all sounded rather gruesome. It will happen as long as you are rejected, my mother finished. That part caught my interest in particular, and I found myself sitting up. Whoa, hold on, are you saying it'll always be like this? My voice was staccato, and my mother gave me a slow nod. It will come in waves, a few at first, and then more sporadic as you get older. I let out a groan, my anger for Connell completely resurfacing. He had to have known. Why couldn't he feel the heat? Why was it only for girls? This sucks, I mumbled to myself, rubbing my eyes. My mom let out a laugh, patting my leg. That's when I started to feel the heat creep in again. This time it was faster, much more abrasive than the last. Mom, I started to say. Before I could get the words out though, when the heat spread all over my body, with a choked gasp I kicked the blankets away from me, and my mother started to yell to my brother. I couldn't hear what she was saying though, because it all was muffled together. I closed my eyes, and hoped for the pain to stop. My house is lonely. Perhaps that is because it's always empty, but right now, it just looks like a sad, lonely place. Sometimes I think that it was always a sad house, because it doesn't look like it was ever light. Taking my bag from my car, I slammed the door shut and started walking to my front door. It was dark out, product of me going to the gym after school. Since I wasn't getting the same amount of exercise as I got from training, I had to supplement it somehow. As I was fiddling with my keys, trying to find the right one, I glanced over at Ruby's house. It was painful, knowing that she wouldn't understand. Every time I see her face, I can feel the pain she's in. She won't ever understand, nor will my wolf, but it's for the best. I can't sleep anymore. My nights are filled with tossing and turning, my restless wolf begging for me to come to my senses. Sometimes I almost listen to him, walking downstairs and stopping at the door. Looking away from her house, I let out a tired sigh and opened my door, walking it. Jax met me at the door, panting happily. Putting down my duffel bag, I went to my knees, running my hands through his fluffy hair. I let him lick my face, before walking to my living room. The floor plan was simple. When you walk in, there are stairs straight in front of you, and a hallway going to the back of the house. To the left is the living room and a small office, and to the right is a kitchen and the dining room. It was a big house. Too big for one person. I took off my coat and shoes, letting out a sigh as I sat on my sofa. Jax jumped up next to me, curling up into my side. We sat like that for a few minutes, before I decided to get up and get a beer. Jax just sat and watched as I stood, leaving my comfortable seat which I knew was going to be overtaken as soon as I left. My kitchen had a lot of windows, which faced straight onto Ruby's house. Generally I closed them, because it seemed like a strange invasion of privacy, but today they were open. Her house was lit up like a firecracker. They had nice big windows, and you could see the light shine from all of them, even the ones that had curtains. They were bright with the light behind them. I pulled a beer from the fridge and cracked it open as I looked at her house, curiosity taking me over. Taking a big gulp of my drink, I reached towards the window and closed the shutters tight, turning away. Walking back to the couch, I sat down, patting Jax who was sleeping. Before I had a chance to settle down, my doorbell rang. It was one of those cheerful doorbells, so it went on for quite a while. Normally I would just let it ring, but I decided to be hospitable. With a sigh I stood, and made my way to the door. Opening it, I was taken aback by what I saw. There was Mrs. Delson, her face red and full of worry. Her son stood next to her, Zach, if I can remember correctly. He resembled his father, tall with light brown skin and curly hair. When I looked down to his arms, I easily recognized Ruby, though her face was turned away. Her long hair was covering her face, but when it was removed, she had a pained expression. My stomach twisted in immediate fear over her being hurt, and I reached for her, taking her from Zach's arms. Though he was unwilling, he let me, and I cocooned Ruby against my chest. She let out a sigh of relief and tried to get closer, much to my surprise. She's in heat, and we're out of ice. Cold water isn't working anymore, Ruby's mother cried, and I squeezed Ruby in my arms, realizing what was wrong. I had completely forgotten that was an offset of rejection. Zach looked at me curiously, before looking past towards my stairs. Do you have any ice? He asked, and I nodded, motioning to my kitchen. I have a pack in the freezer. Just get as much as you can and I'll put her in the tub, I told them, and moved towards the stairs. Ruby's mom stayed down, going to the kitchen with Zach. I held her close to me as I ran up the stairs and to the bathroom. Once we were in the bathroom, I lowered her on the ground so I could turn on the tub. She immediately moaned, shaking her head as she blindly reached out for me. She wasn't completely lucid. It seemed like her body was the thing reacting. I'm sorry, Ruby. I apologized, as I gently laid her on the tile, reaching for the knob on the faucet. She would have had a snappy remark if she could focus, but now she only stayed silent. Ruby wrapped her arms around my leg. The only way to calm down the heat was to be close to your mate, so that the bond starts to heal. Kneeling on the tile, I let Ruby hug me, trying to relieve her pain. As soon as her mother came up, I would have to leave, which means she would be in more pain. Ruby was nearly limp in my arms, all her movements slow. We stayed like that for a few moments, before I heard Zach's loud footsteps trample up my stairs. I moved away from Ruby, though she protested, and stood, moving away. I've got the ice, Zach said as he poured ice into the tub. Ruby's mom came in soon after that, pouring in a bowl full of ice. Her mother shooed Zach and I out, closing the door behind us as she started stripping Ruby of her clothes. I could hear Ruby's cries from my bedroom, and as they got worse, my chest started to constrict. With a sigh, I left my room, walking downstairs. Jax was still in a pleasant sleep on the couch, snoring lightly. Rubbing my face sleepily, I sat on my couch, picking up my beer. Zach came to join me, sitting in a nearby seat. We sat in silence, both of our minds clouded with thoughts. He was staring at me, a contemplating look on his face. "She's your mate, isn't she?" he finally asked, and I froze. She hadn't told him, he just deducted. Taking a sip of beer, I sat silent, trying to think of an answer. "Yes, sorry I broke your sister's heart?" He looked impatient, so I just decided to nod, looking away from him. The air in the room thickened as he got angrier. "You don't understand." I tried to tame him, cautiously putting down my drink. His eyes were changing colors, a key sign that his inner wolf was coming out. Though he was of strong blood, I could easily take him down. I didn't want it to get to that, however, knowing I shouldn't make myself any more unpopular with Ruby. "What don't I understand?" "You denied my sister of the one thing she's always wanted," he growled, standing. I stood too, putting my hands up. "Listen. It was what was best," I told him, walking to the kitchen. He followed me, pulling my shoulder back as we reached the hallway. "What do you mean?" His hand tightened on my shoulder, but I didn't remove it. "What's best for your sister isn't me," I replied simply, and I felt his grip loosen. It seemed I was finally getting through to him. "Do you understand what you've done to her?" he said slowly, looking towards the stairs. She was probably still in the tub, in pain. I sighed, rubbing my face. I understood more than both of them thought. "I know." We both sat in silence. He had calmed down, his wolf under control. I knew he would always be angry, but he also wanted Ruby to be safe. If that meant not with me, then he'd take that chance. The atmosphere changed, and all the negative energy slipped away. I turned away from Zach to go into the kitchen, looking for a glass. Once I poured water into it, I left Zach and walked upstairs to my room. The bathroom door was still closed, but I could hear Mrs. Delson's voice soothing Ruby. There was a loud sloshing sound as Mrs. Delson pulled Ruby from the tub. Walking to my drawers, I pulled out one of my shirts for Mrs. Delson to put on her. I figured Mrs. Delson could figure out her underwear situation. I knocked on the bathroom door, and once Mrs. Delson's face greeted mine, I handed her the shirt. She thanked me, before proceeding to slam the door in my face. Backing away, I walked back downstairs, going straight to the couch once again. This time Zach was on his phone, paying no attention to me. We sat in silence for a few minutes, before soft footsteps drew our attention to the stairs. Ruby's asleep. I put her in your bed. I hope you don't mind, Mrs. Delson said, almost embarrassed. It's all right, she can stay there for the night, I told her, and I could hear Zach's disapproving grumble from the corner. Mrs. Delson smiled with thanks, and went to her son, giving him a hug. You can stay in the guest room overnight if you'd like, I told them, looking at their tired faces. Mrs. Delson jumped at the chance, while Zach said he was just going to go back home. After I showed Mrs. Delson the guest room, I walked back to my room, opening the door as quiet as I could. Ruby was dead asleep, her chest rising and falling every 2 seconds. I pulled over a chair to sit next to her, tucking in the blankets around her before sitting down. She looked so peaceful when she slept, as though none of what had just happened. There was a seed of sadness in the pit of my stomach as I watched her shift. Reaching forward, I moved the hair from her face, taking a better look. I wished she knew how much it hurt me. I wished she knew that I wasn't some uncaring bastard who didn't care about her. I rejected her because I cared about her. My hands fell to her side on the bed, near her stomach. As the time ticked by, I became tired, my eyelids falling as I tried to shake myself awake. Soon enough, I couldn't stay awake anymore, and I fell into a deep sleep by her side. I hate silence. Pure silence, in particular. Something about the skin crawling nothing drives me crazy. The type of silence where you can hear the pulse of your heart in your ears. I woke up to silence, something that was almost foreign. In my house there was always a steady throb of sound, whether it be the near constant sound of my family's chatter, or my TV that I forgot to turn off. I was creeped out by the silence. My body was heavy, but as soon as I could, I moved my hand to my face. After I had rubbed my eyes, I let them adjust to the sunlit room. The first thing I noticed was the ceiling. Instead of the glow in the dark stars I've had since I was a child, it was a slate of dull beige. There was a large window to the left, which curtains were tied back to let the warm sunlight in. A chair in the corner, a dresser on the side. Definitely not my room. Lifting myself up, I looked around the room, taking in all the details. I took a deep breath, taking in the sickly sweet smell of vanilla. It was all over the room, all over the blankets, all over me. Taking the cloth of the oversized t-shirt in my hands, I rubbed the material, before letting it fall. I tried to recall what had happened the night before, but to no avail. I could remember playing the card game bullshit with my brother, before blacking out in the middle of yelling peanut butter. Tying my hair up, I crawled out of bed, and moved to the door, cracking it open. The house was familiar, and flashes of my childhood came back to me. Running through the halls, being yelled at. This was once Mecca's home. The home of happiness, and sorrow. I pushed down my thoughts as I walked forward down the hall. Sharpening my hearing, I could hear the sound of movement downstairs. I took my time walking down the stairs, preparing myself for the inevitable. Once I reached the downstairs, I stopped at the bottom, and peered around the corner. Connell was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes on the stove. My mother was drinking coffee, looking as much as a mess as me. Once Connell noticed my scent, he looked up, straight at me, peering from the corner. My face got hot as I stepped away, pushing my back against the wall. My mother must have heard, and called me in. "Ruby, baby, come eat breakfast," she called, and I followed her orders begrudgingly. Connell had returned to fixing up breakfast when I walked in, which relieved me. Sitting on a stool at the counter, I waited patiently while Connell placed a plate of food in front of me. Ignoring Connell, I started eating, and was halfway through my plate before he even sat down. It was a weird feeling, being so close to him, doing average people things. Mr. Wood was such a good help, Ruby. You should thank him, and stop eating like a rabid dog. My mother rambled, and I could see Connell smirk as he took a sip of his coffee. Frowning at her, I swallowed my pancakes and sat back, looking bored. There was no way I was going to say thank you. My mother let out a sigh before standing. I'm going to go home. Why don't you finish up eating? My mother told me. Before leaving, Connell and I sat in silence. Before I started to eat my pancakes once again. Do you feel all right? Connell asked quietly, causing me to look up. I'm sure my face was not pleasant, so I looked away, taking another bite of my food. He took that as a sign, and went back to sipping his coffee. You're a jackass, I said once I finished chewing, before going in for another bite. He looked up, surprise evident on his face. With a sigh, he put down his cup and stood, walking to the sink. With a frown, he started to speak. His voice rough. You wouldn't understand. I glared up at him, my heart pitting itself into my stomach. I hated that. Someone telling you that you won't understand something. I deserve to know. You owe me that. I spit back at him, angrily slamming my fork on my plate. The noise was clamorous, and then silence ensued. He looked at me with a sullen expression, rubbing his face with his hand. He was contemplating something. Before he sharply shook his head. Whatever I do, will hurt you, he said quietly, almost gently, as though he was trying to teach a child something. Just leave it be, Ruby. I watched as he left the kitchen, my mind whizzing with confusion. Everything that had just happened was foggy. And as I tried to understand what he was saying, I came to the decision that I was probably fighting a losing battle. I wasn't going to get any answers out of him. Standing, I put my plate in the sink, before walking to the front door. I saw his dog wagging his tail, laying next to the door. Kneeling down, I rubbed his ears, taking a deep breath. Your dad is such a dick. The dog just tilted his head and panted, before giving me a quick lick on the cheek. My immediate reaction was to wipe my cheek, before giving him another pat. With one last farewell, I opened the door, and left. I wasn't sure if I was worse off than before, or better. It all felt dull and empty, either way. With my heart swirling with emotions, I looked up at his house one last time, before walking towards my own. Sarah's house was a nice 2-story house with a paint-chipped door and yellow flowers out front. It was a nice getaway, considering her parents were almost always gone, so it was always empty. Other than Sarah, of course. Sarah always insists she liked solitude, but I know she doesn't. She'd grown used to it, being alone. If you knock on her door, however, she'll always answer. There's a part of her that always wants someone near her. So, she answered the door when I knocked, and said nothing when I flew in looking like a mess. I had gotten ready, in loose terms, in a very short amount of time. I threw on some sweats, a random shirt, and tucked Connell's shirt deep in my drawers. I didn't brush my hair, forgot to put in my contacts, and only brushed my teeth because my mother told me to. So it was safe to say that I looked rough. I refused to look in a mirror, afraid it would make me more depressed. Sarah looked as she always did, as though she just came out of art class. Her hair was secured in a bun, and she had her butterfly apron tied around her. Though there was no fresh paint on her, there was plenty of dried paint on the apron. Her eyes were calculating, but she showed no emotions. She closed the door, and walked upstairs, saying nothing, only expecting me to follow. I did, of course, and soon we were settled in her room. I was lying on her bed, my face buried in my hands. She was working on a canvas in the corner of her room near her window. The smell of paint was overpowering, but she didn't seem to notice. After a few minutes of silence, just as I detested, I decided to speak up. I was rejected, I said, skipping all the minor details and getting straight to the point. Her soothing paint strokes jerked to a stop, and she looked back at me. She was thinking. A lot. Probably trying to come up with a statement that wouldn't be insensitive, and most likely failing to do so. You didn't tell anyone? She went back to her painting, her expression flustered. She was critical, just like her parents. She tries to find the reasonings behind things, and when there aren't good reasons, she thinks it's stupid. That's why she thinks most of my actions range on the idiotic side. I'm sorry. I ignored her question, not knowing what I would say if I was to answer it. Again she stopped painting, this time putting down her brush, moving to the bed. No reason to be, she said quietly, rubbing her hands on her apron. I actually saw her this time, the real Sarah, the falling apart Sarah, the one that is horrible at consoling people, but on occasion tries to. She looked tired, but tried to hide it, sitting on the bed next to me. I felt bad, knowing that she already has a lot to think about. Unlike me, she doesn't have parents that would let her do whatever she wanted. Her future is already set up, and her parents are resilient to change. They'd probably disown her if they knew she was attempting to get into CalArts. I could tell something was wrong. She continued, laying back on her bed next to me. I turned on my side to look at her, grabbing her arm. You were just so sad. Closing her eyes, she put her head on my shoulder. I took the opportunity to hug her, letting out a sigh. The world is so wrong when you're sad, Ruby. She mumbled, hugging me back. We stayed like that for a few minutes, both of us thinking about different things. My mind wandered from Connell, to Sarah, to my future. Everything that was once clear was now blurred. I think Sarah fell asleep not long after that, exhaustion kicking in. I stayed awake for a while after that, laying on my back, thinking. I texted my mom that I'd be home after dinner. I was tired of being upset, but still my heart was filled with sadness. There were many legends in the wolf community, coming straight from Alexander McKay's Werewolf Guide, that say that once you are rejected you never heal. It's not like you get a second chance, your heart is always yearning for its other piece. Some wolves even die from it, their heart basically giving up from the stress. Once I got tired of staring at the ceiling, I closed my own eyes. Soon sleep took me too, and I allowed it without a fight. Sarah was staring at me with her arms crossed, tapping her foot. I looked away, chewing the inside of my cheeks. Her blue eyes were big and intense, drilling holes into me. How could you have not told her? She asked, her tone demanding. Looking away guiltily, I shrugged my shoulders. It had somehow come into conversation that I hadn't told Maddie that I was rejected. Normally Maddie was the first to know of my issues, since she didn't have a tongue like a viper. This time, however, I was nervous about telling her. A look of realization crossed her face. You weren't going to tell her, Sarah stated, causing a sheepish look to pass my features. Pulling nervously on my curly hair, I sat on her bed, letting out a stressed sigh. She's so happy and she doesn't need me bringing her down, I defended, my voice changing to a whiny tone. Sarah gave me a stolid look, blinking a few times. So you decided I was a good match to bring down? Sarah asked, her eyebrows going up. I let out a nervous laugh, shaking my head. No way, that's not what I meant. Sarah just rolled her eyes at me, a shadow of a smile on her face. Well, we have to go and tell her, she decided, pulling me up. I sat down immediately after, shaking my head. I don't remember agreeing to this. Maddie doesn't know, and what she doesn't know can't kill her, I argued, flopping down on the bed so she couldn't force me up. I heard if you go dead weight it's harder for you to be kidnapped. She deserves to know. Sarah was already grabbing her house keys from her dresser. I wanted to argue some more, but Sarah was already heading out the door. Convincing her was near impossible when she was set on her goal, and right now her goal was to tell Maddie of my predicament. Can't you just respect my wishes? I asked as we walked down the stairs. I'm sure if I was facing Sarah she'd be rolling her eyes. I could, but I'm not going to. We are best friends, and much as I refuse to acknowledge it, this is a trio, not a duo, and everyone needs to be informed. She stopped at the platform, sharply turning to look at me. Besides, if I was rejected and I didn't tell you, don't you think you'd be pissed? I stared at her figure as she walked away, biting my lip. I hated her for being right. The drive to Maddie's house was slow and painful, mainly due to Sarah's constant reprimands. We pulled up to Maddie's suburban home a few minutes past 4 o'clock, yet we stayed stationary in front of her house for longer. Sarah sat in silence, letting me brood over whatever disaster was about to incur. You ready yet? Sarah asked suddenly, her impatience getting the best of her. She was normally a patient person, but she seemed to be particularly wound up. I let out a dramatic sigh, and then a groan, arching my back in a stretch. Once I was done with that, I started sifting through my car for my hairbrush, much to Sarah's anguish. As I was reached for my water bottle, Sarah grabbed it and opened her door. You can drink and walk, she told me, as she started walking away. Breathing out slowly, I finally got out of the car and walked after her. Maddie's father opened the door when we knocked. He seemed rushed, but took a moment to talk to us. Hello, girls. I didn't know you were dropping by today. He moved his hands inward, ushering us in. As we entered, we decided to answer him. We just wanted to talk to Maddie. Sarah answered him before I could, and he let out a gruff laugh. Sounds like a serious girl talk. Maddie should be in her room. I nodded slowly, but I was distracted by a strange smell. Sharpening my nose, I took in a deep breath and shook my head. Does anyone else smell something burning? Sarah asked, looking at Mr. Jones, who blankly looked towards the inside of his house. Suddenly, he let out a yelp. Shit, my steak. He ran off, leaving Sarah and I staring wide-eyed after him. Well then. Sarah moved towards the stairs, and I reluctantly followed her. Sarah walked up the stairs rather swiftly, while I trudged behind slowly. She didn't seem to notice as she hurried ahead, completely in her own world. Sarah missed no beats when reached Maddie's door, not knocking as she opened it. To our or more Sarah's disappointment, the bedroom was empty. The loud buzz of Maddie's shower could be heard, causing Sarah to sigh. Though my mind was still racing with thoughts of telling Maddie, I let out a victory hum pleased. Guess we should have waited longer. I smiled, walking over to Maddie's bed, taking a seat. Her white covers were pulled back and messy, indicating she had probably woken up not too long before. Sarah sat on the seat across from me, silent, glaring at me. We waited like that for a few agonizing minutes, waiting as patiently as we could to hear the shower shut off. Like me, however, Maddie took long showers. Having enough of waiting, I stood and walked over to Maddie's vanity, inspecting the pictures taped around the rim of the mirror. Plenty of pictures of Zach, Sarah and I. Most of Sarah's were when she wasn't expecting it, since she hated pictures. There was one that caught my interest, where she was actually smiling. It was when she spent Christmas with Maddie's family since hers were out of town, like they always were. Nowadays she has too much pride and tries to be alone over holidays when her family is gone. But we always seem to wedge ourselves in. With a smile I looked to another picture. There was one of her and Zach, on his 18th birthday when he realized she was his mate. They were caught in an embrace, looking at each other happily. Though the picture was gleeful, my heart still ached. I pushed my sad thoughts away in turn of happy ones, accepting it for what it is, a happy memory. I looked away from the pictures, turning around. Sarah had moved from the chair and was snuggled into Maddie's bed, her face peaceful as she drifted to sleep. Rolling my eyes, I walked over to her, sitting down on the edge of the bed. She didn't seem disturbed by my presence, only moving towards the bed to give me room. We sat like that for another few minutes, when the shower clicked off. Excited, I moved to slap Sarah awake, but stopped when I saw how peaceful she looked. Snapping, I turned away towards the bathroom door. When the door opened, I nearly fell back into Sarah. Maddie came prancing, or dancing, more so, in a towel. Tied securely around her chest, she moved her head to a beat as she walked forward. There was no music playing, or at least not any that we could hear. Completely missing us, she moved towards her drawer, opening it as she started to mouth the words to whatever song she had playing in her head. Amused, I finally decided to speak out. Maddie? With a shriek, Maddie moved her hands out of her drawer, hitting one the way out. As she looked at me, her eyes big, she shook her hand. When she came to her senses, she started arguing. What are you two doing here? And how did you get in my house? Have you no respect for privacy? She slammed her drawer closed as she turned to her, becoming dramatic. Sarah stopped her then, pushing herself up on her arms groggily. Ruby has something to tell you. She yawned and collapsed back down, snuggling deeper into the bed. Her voice must have been serious, because Maddie gave up her dramatic and crossed her arms. "Well, all right then, but I have to get dressed first," was all Maddie said as she turned away from me, opened her dress again to sift through. Once she had an appropriate selection of clothes, she went to the bathroom. A few minutes later she came out in pajamas. Walking to her vanity, she sat and started brushing her hair. "Go on," she said, looking at me in the mirror. Rubbing my hands together, I crossed my legs on my bed, trying to think of how I should attack the situation. The way I had told Sarah was up front, just as she liked it. Maddie was different than that though. "I'm sorry I was distant," I started. Looking downward, Maddie smiled sweetly in the mirror, putting the brush down. "It's okay. It's not like you missed much," she laughed to herself. I smiled weakly, looking up at her. She looked so happy, which made me feel worse. I knew Sarah was listening though, and I knew that I should tell her. "It's just," I looked around the room, tapping my leg. Something bad happened. That caught Maddie's attention, and she tilted her head, her eyebrows furrowing. She wanted to interrupt and ask millions of questions I could tell, but since she had the patience of a saint, she let me continue. Well, what I'm trying to say is," I trailed off, sighing. Why was it so hard to tell my best friend something so important? "A few weeks ago I met my mate." I swallowed. Maddie's face lit up, and she started to smile. "And he rejected me." Maddie blinked a few times, the corner of her lips turning downward. "What?" Maddie's voice cracked and she studied my face, looking for a hint that I was joking. She wanted it to be a joke, because in her book, this was one of the worst things that could ever happen to a wolf. As the shock started to process, she stood, moving towards me slowly. "Oh, Ruby, I'm sorry," she said as she hugged me tightly, sniffling. Since I had cried plenty of tears over the matter, I tried to push my own emotions away, only hugging her back. After a moment of quiet, I moved away from her, sitting back on the bed. "There's more." This time Sarah sat up, looking at me with a confused expression. I exhaled, rubbing my forehead tiredly. "My mate is Mr. Wood." I waited. Maddie was the first to speak, her voice laced with malice. "That fucker." I lifted an eyebrow at her strong choice of words. Even Sarah seemed surprised. "Sorry," she apologized after, though she didn't seem that sorry. "Now you're right. He is a little bitch," Sarah agreed with her, nodding. She didn't seem so surprised though, which made me think she already suspected something. I couldn't suppress my giggle, and soon we were all laughing. It felt good laughing at something so bad, almost therapeutic. We stayed like that for a while, just talking. I explained everything that had happened to them, and while Maddie commented on almost everything, Sarah sat mute. It was like it always was, comfortable. Life seemed to continue moving after my encounter with Connell. Though my heart still quivered whenever I saw him, I didn't. I could actually be in the same room as him without wanting to pass out, which was good. We found a routine of normalcy, even if it was for a short period of time. It was on a rather cold afternoon though, that my life once again started moving. This time, full force. "Can I have a cheeseburger, a small fry, and a large Pepsi?" "Wait, no. Diet Pepsi?" Maddie called out of the window into the speakers. Her sunglasses were perched low on the bridge of her nose as she glanced at Sarah, who had a murderous look on her face. The person taking the orders was silent, before finally speaking. Ma'am, this is Starbucks?" There was another long spout of silence, before Maddie smiled, turning away from Sarah towards the ordering box. "Oh, okay, thanks," she chirped, pulling her car into the parking lot. As we left Starbucks, I put my chin into the palm of my hand, smiling. "You're crazy," was all I said. "Any dares you give me relating to food will be answered, I can promise you that." Maddie laughed, and I couldn't help but laugh with her. We had spent our day around town, fulfilling stupid dares. Sarah was losing majorly because she refused to participate in such stupid activities. "I have worse dares than that, Maddie," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "I was just being easy." Maddie looked at Sarah out of the corner of her eye, tapping her fingers on the wheel. "Oh, yeah?" she asked, curious. Sarah just nodded slightly, an evil glint in her eyes. "Maddie, do what's best and let it go," I told Maddie, and she just sighed. "And Sarah, stop agitating." Sarah let out a humph and looked away, squinting from the sunlight. I looked at my phone, yawning when I saw the time. It was only mid-afternoon, but I considered that nap time. "I'm tired, take me home," I demanded annoyingly, causing Maddie to nearly crash the car trying to hit me. I kicked blindly in her direction, letting out a playful yell. It was a good thing we were driving on such an empty road. "What's the magic word?" Maddie asked, rearing away from my kicks. I let out a loud hum, tapping my finger on my chin. "Please?" I asked. But Maddie only shook her head. Crossing my arms, I gave her a look. "What?" "It's please, Holy One." I blinked a few times, before shaking my head. "Please, Holy One?" I asked, and she gave an approving nod. Sarah snorted from her seat, looking up from her sketchbook. "Nothing holy about you," she laughed, and Maddie scoffed, throwing a quarter at her. "Shut up, I am holy, thank you very much," Maddie defended, looking for another thing to throw at the still laughing Sarah. Looking up with a mischievous glint in her eyes, Sarah moved her feet from the dashboard, pointing her finger at Maddie. "I'm sure Zach wouldn't say that," Sarah accused, and Maddie's mouth fell open. She yelled at Sarah, who started to sink in her sink, her hands dramatically going to her hair. I can just hear it now. Her voice got lighter as she started to pretend to be Maddie. "Oh please Zach, more," she was cackling, and Maddie was hitting her from the driver's seat, a blush on her face. I covered my ears as Sarah continued, yelling out, "Please, this is so disgusting." That made Sarah laugh more, causing her to stop her impressions. Though Maddie looked so red she might pass out, she was also laughing. It was only me that was mortified, probably because they were talking about my brother. "I hate both of you," I said, a slight smile on my face. Sarah had barely calmed down, trying to catch her breath. I knew her parents had come home a few days before, so she was in a rather good mood. When my house came into view, Sarah started doing her impressions again. Just as she was reaching over to grab Maddie, I got out of the car, slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear both of their laughter from the car, and I only shot them the finger as I walked up my driveway. My parents were gone, busy with work. Zach was staying at his friend's house, doing a project. As soon as I stepped into my house, I pulled off my jacket, yawning. Rubbing my eyes, I lumbered up my creaky stairs and took a sharp right to my room. Once I had opened my door, I walked straight to my bed, kicking of my shoes and heaving myself onto the soft covers. Snuggling deeper into them, I let out a content sigh, shutting my eyes tighter. Then, I smelled something. My eyes snapped open, and I jerked up. Shock went over my system as I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the interior of my room. Everything was in disarray. My bedside table was tossed to the side, and my lamp was broken on the floor. My drawers were all open, and my clothes flung around my room. My closet was open, and everything inside it everywhere. With a cry, I stood, my hands going to my mouth. A strange, unfamiliar scent invaded my scent. It was everywhere. Someone had broken into my house. Taking a few steps forward, I moved my shaking hands from my face to my stomach. I stood still for a few seconds, using my hearing to try and tell if someone was in my house. Luckily, whoever had been there was gone. I went to my dresser first, looking at my top drawer. It was my underwear drawer, and it was half empty. Some of my underwear was thrown around my room. Gross. I hoped whoever went through my stuff didn't have a fetish, because that would be just plain weird. Trying to ignore it, I pushed the remaining underwear around and looked at the bottom. Underneath it all was my letter. With a sigh of relief, I moved away from my drawer and shook my head. I was getting a headache, but I tried to clear my mind anyways. I looked around the rest of my room, but nothing seemed to be missing. Not that I would notice, since my room was naturally messy. Still, my jewelry was in its case, and my cash was still safely hidden. With a stressed sigh, I sat on my bed, looking around my room. They must have been looking for something, but what? I had nothing of importance that I could think of. Clutching my ring for comfort, I reviewed the damage once more before standing, wiping the tears from my eyes. My parents would be home in a few houses, and I didn't want them seeing the wreck. Since it seemed only to be my room that was affected, I wasn't sure how I could explain to them that I knew nothing of what was going on. I hadn't cleaned my room in so long I barely knew where to start. I put away my clothes and threw away my lamp. It took another hour before I had cleaned up everything in my room. I also had to fix up my house, which had also been looked through. Mildly though. After I had done all that, I sat on my bed, sniffling. My room now looked cleaner than it had before, but I still felt violated. Rubbing my eyes, I stood, leaving my room and walking downstairs. Breathing deeply, I opened my front door and went to my porch. Sitting on my front steps, the house was making me dizzy. Leaning my head back, I exhaled. I didn't care how cold it was getting, or how bad I looked. There was a loud sound from my right, and when I opened my eyes, I noticed a set of curious eyes looking at me. Connell was standing in his driveway, right outside of his car. I hadn't heard him pull up, but then again, my senses were once again in overdrive. He looked conflicted as soon as he saw my face. I could only assume it was about my eyes, which were most definitely red and puffy. I held my breath as I watched him, waiting for him to make a move. After a short moment of looking at me, he turned away, walking towards his door. My eyes remained on him as he climbed his front steps and pulled his keys out of his jacket pockets. When he opened his door, he looked over at me one last time. A certain look on his face. Sadness. As soon as he had opened the door, it was closed, and I was once again completely alone. I've never had a clear vision of my future. Now, it's more foggy than ever. Though I never knew what I wanted to do, or be, I always knew I had a mate to fall back on. Someone who would always care, and encourage me. That went out to window. It didn't used to be a problem, especially before Connell came. Now, with Connell's rejection, more problems then that has started to arise. What do you mean I won't graduate? My voice was high and pitchy, and I was beyond flustered. I was sitting in the principal's office, learning news that could only be matched by being rejected by Connell. My principal, Dr. Ridley, sat patiently across from me, his face unmoving. He was a stout man, with a red face and always narrowed eyes. He was also a werewolf, and one who's always been dead set on ruining my life. That might be a slight exaggeration, but that's what I feel. Your grade has gone down so much in a month that I'm almost impressed. You see, if you fail this class, you won't have enough credits to graduate, he said, showing me my credits line up. Right, bare minimal as always. Oh, okay, but I can do something about it, right? I asked, sitting up straighter in my chair. Dr. Ridley sighed, standing. You can, but will you? Probably not. Which is why I'm putting you in a study group. I looked at him, processing his words. You're kidding, right? Dr. Ridley shook his head, moving on the other side of his desk. Mr. Wood has, as of this moment, has an after-school study group. He smiled at me in a weird, gotcha, kind of way. And you are its first member. My jaw slacked, and I felt anger prickle in my body. Anger, shame, unhappiness? Maybe a mix of all three. I started, but couldn't finish my sentence. My English grade completely plummeted after Connell came. I couldn't pay attention for a long time, and I was so upset most of the other times that I didn't get any work done. There will be a few more additions to the club. He then looked me in the eye and sighed, getting this dad-like look on his face. I'm doing this because you're a smart girl, and one day could be an incredible young woman. I just stared some more, not knowing what to say. What do you say when your principal goes all caring on you? Shifting uncomfortable, I just nodded. He suddenly smiled and clapped, standing. Great, now, meetings will be twice a week for 2 hours, for a month. He stood, and motioned for me to stand. But isn't that a bit much? I asked, as he led me out. Shaking his head, he opened his door and made me leave, stopping at the doorframe. We haven't even been in school for 3 months yet, I continued, moving my hands wildly. What could we possibly study for that long? Nonsense. Mr. Ridley laughed, looking at his watch. But, you will be fine, he interrupted me, nearly slamming the door in my face. Letting out a long sigh, which turned into a groan, I moved away from the door. The scent of vanilla caught my attention. Looking up, I saw Connell walking towards me. But he wasn't paying attention, he was intensely looking through a folder. Something inside me got angry all over again, and I walked over to him, poking him in the arm. He jeered back, and was about to get angry when he saw it was me. A study group? Really? My mouth worked without me. Connell took a step away from me, closing his folder. What are you talking about? We both stared at each other, confused. Connell! Perfect! Mr. Ridley walked out, completely overlooking me. When he did see me, he laughed, patting me on the arm. I'm glad you met your first member Connell, Mr. Ridley said, rocking on his heels. Connell still looked confused, looking from me to Mr. Ridley. What are you talking about? Connell asked. It then struck me that he had absolutely no idea what we were talking about. Miss Ridley laughed nervously, looking between us. You're have an after-school group. I just forgot to tell you. Connell's face went from calm to pissed in 3 seconds. What? He asked, his voice lifting. I couldn't help but laugh. Even though I was in major trouble, turning away, I could hear their bickering, but I chose to tune it out. Walking away, I could hear my heart beating. It seemed like life was constantly throwing me curveballs. Why is it that time goes fast? Only when you don't want it to. I watched as the clock seemed to tick at a rather fast pace. It was Thursday, which meant it was the first day of my study group. My nerves had been in tangles all day, but I tried, unsuccessfully, to push it down, tapping my foot. I tried to focus on my study guide, but ended up just putting away. I can't believe you have to see that bastard, Maddie whispered to me, looking up from her own notes. I just shrugged, leaning forward. I don't think it can be helped. The teacher shushed me from the front of the classroom, giving me a look. Sheepishly, I looked back down to my empty desk. I didn't look back at the clock until the bell rang. When it did, I slowly packed up and waited until everyone was out of the classroom to leave. Bye, Mrs. Marks, I bid my chemistry teacher goodbye. She looked up at me, confusion clear on my face. I wasn't her biggest fan. Goodbye, Ruby, she responded, looking back on her desk. I lingered for a few moments before leaving. Kids were pushing each other to get out of school. I went against the grain of the traffic as I walked to Connell's class, trying to be passive. Connell was lounging in his chair when I walked in, writing something on a piece of paper. He didn't look up when I passed, but I could feel the atmosphere change. Sit down, Ruby, the other students should be coming soon. He looked at his watch, and then at the door. I slung my bag off my shoulders and onto the ground, plopping down into one of the seats. The next person to come in was Jared, someone who came to school so little I often forgot he existed, even though he's been in my English class since kindergarten. Jared nodded at me, but sat a few seats away, being aloof as always. I sighed, rubbing my eyes as we waited for more people. Georgia came next, a senior who was on her second try of the class. She was older, but definitely not wiser. And the last was Camille. To say Camille wasn't pretty would be a lie. She had sharp cheekbones, a body that even I, oh so confident Ruby, could envy, and teeth whiter than paper. She had faults though. Many, in fact, one of them being, she was a two-faced bitch. Normally I didn't see Camille, because she wasn't in any of my classes. This was helpful, because we've never gotten along. Though on the social ladder, we're on the same tier, we're very different. In theory, we're very similar. We both like parties, boys, and hate school with a passion. But the differences are more in our personality. Camille is the type of person to visibly make faces when she doesn't like something, or she doesn't get her way. I prefer to brood in silence. She also loves things she can't have. Rumors breed around her like AIDS, and she does nothing to discount them. Her cheating on her ex-boy toy with her other ex-boy toy, her sleeping with her guidance counselor, or telling a girl she looked like a pug. I'm sure the moment she set eyes on Connell, her world got a bit better. Though Connell would never show her much attention, at least I would hope, she wouldn't stop trying. You have to give her one thing. She's determined. Hello, Mr. Wood, she said in a cheerful voice as she walked into the classroom. I nearly snorted at her fake song-like tone. Her eyes lingered on me for a few seconds before looking back to Connell. Walking to his desk, she chose the seat closest and sat her purse down. So, what are we doing? She asked, pretending to be enthusiastic. Camille was also a wonderful actor, which is why she was led in the school play 4 times in a row. Connell didn't look at her, instead pulling out a packet of papers. Each of you will get a packet that will be completely by next Monday. This is the bare basics. He seemed uninterested as he passed out the packets. I gave him a grim look as he passed, which he just shook his head at. He told us to open our packet, and we all did. Before he could even get a word out, Camille started talking. Mr. Wood. I think we should get to know each other, she smiled, and everyone just tilted their head at her. Connell gave her a dull look. I'm sure you all know each other. We did. All of us, save Georgia, have been in the same classes since we were children. We knew all we needed about each other. I really don't know any of them. Camille gave an innocent pout, looking lost. I couldn't help but call her out. You went to my 9th birthday party, I reminded her, and she just shrugged. That was a long time ago. And my 10th, 11th, 12th, and, unfortunately, my 13th. My parents were friends with hers, which was why I was forced to invite her. Until I smashed a piece of cake in her face, and my parents realized we were simply not destined to be friends. Still, Camille ignored my comments, looking at Jared. I don't know who he is. Jared gave her a bored look, his monotone voice filling the air. I went to formal with you in 8th grade. I laughed once again, and I saw the ghost of a smile on Connell's face. Camille shifted uncomfortably, not knowing what to say. We need to start working. Connell broke the tension, looking down at his packet. Reluctantly, I looked at mine. The time passed slowly. I fell asleep a few times, and Connell had to wake me, usually hitting me on top of the head with a piece of paper. When I was awake, there was an uncomfortable feeling in the air because Camille kept asking Connell inappropriate questions. Do you have a girlfriend? She asked first, leaning forward towards him. He had been reading an excerpt from Romeo and Juliet. No, he answered quickly. Camille let out a shocked gasp. Wow. I for sure thought you would have. I mean, look at you, she laughed. And all of us sat silently. I could feel jealousy pit itself in my stomach. There's no reason. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just watched her dig herself into a deeper hole. Connell didn't answer, only saying they should move on. She persisted though, twirling her brown hair around her finger. My brother wants to know what the best brand for underwear is. You know, the softest, she continued, and I deadpanned. You don't even have a brother, I pointed out. She turned to me quickly, her eyes narrowing. Shut up, Rue, I blinked. She called me the nickname I dreaded more than anything in this world. She made fun of me using that nickname all the time when we were kids. Oh yeah, Camille, Connell laughed but tried to cover it with a cough. Everyone but us was laughing to themselves. Once Connell had finished his coughing, he shut his packet, standing. Why don't we call it a day? He said. We still had half an hour left. But everyone stood, thankful. Goodbye, Mr. Wood. Camille gave him a coy smile. Turning to me, she gave me a vicious glare, turning away. I stared at her as she walked away, her hips swishing almost too much. Picking up my bag, I started towards the door. Goodbye, Ruby, Connell called after me. I paused for a second, turning slightly to look back at him. It felt like there was a change in our relationship. I still hated him, and wanted to scream when I sat him, but it was different, like I could actually stand to be near him and be okay. Goodbye, Mr. Wood. I could even say goodbye. Move your ass, Maddie. Sarah leapt forward and grabbed the hem of Maddie's shirt, pulling her forward. With a screech, both of them fell to the ground, off of the bed. Maddie had been standing directly in front of the TV while the commercials played, looking in the mirror that was behind it. Gordon Ramsay is on, Sarah shouted. Standing up again and jumping on my bed, I sat, crisscross, rolling my eyes at her. She had an unhealthy obsession. Maddie stood slowly, groaning. Crawling onto the bed, she laid horizontally, putting her head on my stomach. I lifted the paper I was working on, eyeing her. "I'm injured," she muttered slowly, lifting her hand to her eyes dramatically. Sarah snorted, but continued watching her TV show. "You know not to get in the way of Sarah's TV shows," I told her, and she grimaced. It was Friday night, and we were having our annual once-a-month sleepover. This was a mandatory sleepover that happened the third Friday of every month. It was not to be missed, no matter the circumstances. This time my parents were out on a PAC conference, so I took the liberty of holding the sleepover. I also forced Zach to leave and stay at his friend's house, though Maddie was against the idea. "We should make cookies," Maddie said suddenly, sitting up. I furrowed my eyebrows, tilting my head. Cooking was none of our strong suits. "That sounds like a bad idea." Sarah turned off the TV, looking unhappy. "It was a rerun," she informed us. "Well, we could try." I tapped my fingers, bending to Maddie's will. It was hard not to when she looked so excited. "Yes, and you can even eat the cookie dough," Maddie promised Sarah, who looked cautious. "I might skip on that," Sarah said slowly. She loved cookie dough and any form of sweets, like me, but by the looks of it, she wasn't sure it would be edible. Rolling off of the bed, Maddie grabbed Juju and ran towards the door. "Hey, no taking my dog hostage," I called after her, but she was already halfway down the stairs. Sarah sighed and stood up, looking towards me. "This is your fault." Walking out the door, she went after Maddie. I followed her out, and soon we were all looking through the cabinets. Sarah was on her phone looking up a recipe, calling out ingredients every once in a while. By some grace, we had all the ingredients. Once all of them were laid out, we decided to get started. "Cream together the butter and sugar," Sarah called out to us. Maddie and I both looked at each other, immediately confused. "Cream?" we asked. Sarah just shrugged, showing us the phone. That was indeed what it said. Before we could move forward, Sarah let out a high-pitched yelp. Standing, looking over, we saw her watching the glass down at the end of the hallway intensely. It led to the backyard, which was pitch black, other than the illumination from the 2 backyard lights. "What's wrong?" I asked, walking over to look out the door. There was nothing that I could see. The thought of investing in some pretty outdoor lights crossed my mind. "I thought I saw someone," Sarah said slowly, walking around the counter. We all stared into the darkness, but it looked still. "Must have been my imagination." Sarah just shrugged. She seemed unnerved though, as she kept looking towards the door. Maddie went back to her cookies, and I just watched the door for a few lingering seconds. Just as I was about to move, I saw the shadow of a wolf move along the forest line. "Oh shit!" I hit Maddie, forcing her to look out the door. We both watched the wolf stalk from one part of the woods to another, looking at the house. "Is that a wolf?" Maddie asked, squinting. I nodded, walking towards the back door. "Are you insane? Get back here," Sarah scolded, grabbing the back of my hoodie to pull me back. "I'm going to lock the door," I angrily whispered to her, looking back outside. The wolf was gone. "The door isn't locked?" Sarah growled. I grimaced, nodding. This time, Sarah pushed me towards the door, hiding behind the wall. "Go on," she persuaded me. I edged forward, watching the darkness intensely. Inch by inch I walked down the hall. When I got to the door, I locked it, and ran back to the girls. We all stood huddled together, looking at the now locked door. "This is bad," Dottie commented. She had been vacant for a while. "Go get Connell." "No," I argued her in my head. Sarah took a step away from us, walking towards the front window, squinting at the lit street. She nodded. "You should go get Mr. Wood," she told me. Of course. It's like they were the same person sometimes. "No, I shouldn't. What's he going to do?" "Hug the wolf," I argued, waving my arms around. Sarah swatted at me, pointing towards the door. "That wolf won't care about a locked door. It's like stalking your house." Sarah's point was valid, but I still shook my head. "We could handle it," I crossed my arms. Sarah gave me a blank stare, putting her hands to her hips. "We could handle it?" she questioned, looking between Maddie and I. Maddie looked sick. She hated fighting with her entire being. "We're strong," I continued. Sarah once again deadpanned. "Not against." She waved her finger angrily towards the darkness. "That." I bounced from foot to foot, tapping my hand on my thigh. "Fine." I caved, turning towards the front door. While I took a few steps forward, Sarah and Maddie stayed glued to their spots. I stopped when I turned the lock, turning back towards the frozen girls. "Aren't you coming?" I asked, motioned towards the door. "Better one of us possibly die than three," Sarah answered. My jaw fell slack. Rushing forward, I grabbed both of their arms, forcing them to walk with me. "You are not getting out of this one." When I opened the door, we all took a cautious step onto the front porch. The wind rustled the leaves. But other than that, it was quiet. We took a few steps forward, me in the front, Sarah in the back, and Maddie squirming in the middle. Every step felt like we were edging towards doom. When we got to the road, I looked towards the right. The road weaved into the woods, with my yard on the right. The woods looked still, but I knew that the wolf was still creeping around there. When I saw glowing eyes looking at me, I let out a shrill yell. "We move now!" I shouted, running away from the girls towards Connell's house. Sarah grabbed a frozen Maddie and ran after me, not looking towards the woods. When we were safely on the porch, I started knocking harshly on the door. I wasn't going to be outside any longer than I had to be. It took a minute before Connell came to the door. Jack sat panting behind Connell, wagging his tail when he saw me. "Girls?" Connell asked, confused. He looked between us, his face growing to one of worry. Maddie was clutching Sarah, shaking like a leaf. Sarah tried her best to comfort her, patting her on the shoulder. "We need help." I swallowed my pride, and lifted my eyes to his. "What happened?" he asked, stepping out onto the porch. I sighed, looking towards my house. "There is a wolf outside my house," I told him, rubbing my arms to warm myself from the cold. "It's like stalking it," Sarah interjected. Maddie nodded, clutching onto Sarah's arm tighter. Connell walked down his porch stairs, and to the road. He stood there for a minute, staring at the trees. Suddenly, he turned towards us, his voice urgent. "Come on, let's go back to your house." He rushed us down the steps and across the street. When we were inside my house, he locked the door and turned off one of the lights. "Maddie, Sarah, I need you to make sure all the windows are locked," he told them. Maddie looked too spooked to move, but Sarah nodded. Gently taking Maddie by the hand, they both went upstairs. "Ruby, I need you to watch the back door," Connell said, leading me towards the back door. He turned off the kitchen light, so we were only lit by the slight moonlight and outdoor lights. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm going to go see what the wolf wants," Connell said, taking off his jacket. He handed it to me and then opened the back door. Before I could protest, he slammed the door in my face and motioned for me to lock it. I couldn't even be angry at him slamming a door in my face, because I was too flabbergasted. He ran out of my backyard, towards the forest. As he ran, I saw no fear. It was just like an alpha, running towards danger no matter the consequence. All they think about is protecting the ones they love. Or something like that. When he disappeared into the darkness, I clutched my hands to my chest. Exhaling shakily, I locked the door and pushed myself against the wall, watching the woods. For a few short moments, I was alone and could only hear the sound of my heartbeat. My breath seemed to be caught at my throat, and I could feel a headache come on. It was only interrupted when Sarah and Maddie came down the stairs. Maddie seemed to be more zen, but still followed closely behind Sarah. "Your brother's room is disgusting," Sarah critiqued, as she came to stand behind me. Maddie nodded, though she seemed to be focused on the backyard. "Is Wolf Boy out there?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms as she squinted into the darkness. Her fear was gone, and was now replaced with annoyance. In some ways, she was just like her parents, callous with understanding. I nodded, joined her to look out at the forest. The leaves fell gently, creating a almost calm atmosphere. If you didn't know what was out there, you would think everything was perfectly all right. We stayed like that for another minute or two. Maddie found solace in her phone, and Sarah and I kept our eyes trained on the woods. Just as my eyes started to become blurry from the constant staring, Connell came bursting out of the woods. Well, bursting is an overstatement. He sort of walked out of the woods. He was stretching, his arms over his head as he walked towards us. Sarah and I's heads tilted as his torso became visible, just for half a second. Clearing my throat, I looked away, and hit Sarah to do the same. Connell came through my back gate and climbed the wooden steps. He looked calm, much calmer than before. Unlocking the door, I let him in, stepping to the side as he entered. He was completely unscathed. The wolf must have been spooked, and it was gone by the time I got there. I couldn't smell it, so I couldn't chase it down. Connell walked into my kitchen, sitting down on one of the stools. Maddie let out a sigh, hugging Sarah, who only looked at her with annoyance. Still, she wrapped her arms around her and patted her on the back. "I'm going to go put her to bed," Sarah yawned, leading Maddie towards the stairs. They fled quickly. As I thought about the events of the night, I became overwhelmed. From the wolf stalking my house, or me, it seemed to be too much. "You're dumb," I sniffed, crossing my arms. "You didn't have to run into the woods like a madman." Connell looked up at me, unsure what to say. After a long bout of silence, he spoke. "I had to keep you guys safe," Connell said slowly. "No, you didn't," I interjected, sharply inhaling. My mind was so confused, but I still found myself trying to argue with him. "You could have just let us deal with it," I continued, my eyes starting to water. I wanted to kick my over-emotional, crybaby self. Instead, I just continued. "Why would you try to help 3 girls that hate you?" I undid my arms, my hand going to my face to wipe a tear away. It was weak, I knew, but I never claimed to be strong. Connell winced at the word hate. He watched me intensely, standing slowly. "You're so dumb," I cried, my hands going to cover my face. My face was hot, and most certainly a tomato red. I let out another cry when I felt Connell's arms wrap around me. I wasn't entirely sure what I was crying about. The stalking wolf, Connell blindly running after it, or Connell in general. Wrapping my arms around Connell, I let myself hug him. I hugged him as tightly as I could, letting myself heal as much as I could. When a few moments passed, I let go of him, forcing myself to stand away. "Lock the door behind you," I told him, looking down towards my feet. My hands shook, so I kept them by my sides. "Goodbye," I whispered, turning away from him. I could hear his breath change. Something about him changed, something inside of him. Before I could stop myself, I walked up the stairs. And I didn't look back. I looked around at the group of bored faces, all of them focused on separate things, none of them focused on me. I cleared my throat, hoping to get their attention. None of them looked up. Fletcher was whistling as Sarah drew a fake tattoo on him with a marker. Maddie and Zach were watching The Office in the corner of the room. We were nestled in my living room, and the sky had just started turning black. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please," I called out, clapping my hands loudly. Maddie came to attention, looking up like a puppy who was about to get a treat. Sarah glanced up, before making a face, and looking back at Fletcher's arm. Both Fletcher and Zach didn't look up at all. "Boys, you will like this," I persuaded, and they finally looked up, both of them straining to keep their attention. "As you all know, Halloween is coming up this weekend," I started, pausing for dramatic effect. When they were all looking at me, I continued. "In light of this, I propose we throw a Halloween party." Fletcher immediately looked excited, nearly jerking his arm away from Sarah, who looked like she was about to bite his head off. "As you may know, the Wolf Court is calling a meeting of all alphas and high-ranking pack members from packs all over the country. This means my parents will be gone over Halloween weekend. So, the party can be held here." Everyone nodded in agreement, even Sarah, who still looked dreadfully bored. "Fletcher, you're in charge of getting the word out. Zach and Maddie, you do food and drinks." I looked at Sarah, who gave me a look. Sarah, you can do decorations, I proposed, and Sarah gave a pleased nod. I'm the fixer. Come to me with problems, I told them, and they just looked at each other as if to say, is that really a good idea? We sat around talking about the party for a bit longer, when Maddie started speaking excitedly. Halloween costumes. We should make it a costume party. Maddie smiled, her eyes going to Zach for confirmation. He seemed caught off guard, as though he was in a special place in his mind and zoned out. I just shrugged, agreeing. Fletcher looked pleased, as though he already knew what stupid costume he would be wearing. Sarah was already asleep on the floor, so she had no input. I'm going to be an angel, Maddie told us. Sarah should be a demon, Fletcher laughed, and soon enough we were all laughing. Sarah let out a groan from the floor, blindingly reaching her arm up to hit Fletcher. We sat for another hour, planning out costumes and expenses, before the night came to a pleasant close. Do you have the drinks? Maddie said slowly, iterating the words slowly and purposely. Her voice was strong, and her eyes were piercing into Zach. I thought you were getting the drinks, Zach defended, putting up his arms, which looked pretty ridiculous considering dressed up as a hot dog. Maddie was dressed head to toe in white, her black hair pinned back to show off her big eyes. What part of Zach? Get the drinks tomorrow. Do you not understand? She sassed, crossing her arms. Zach just shrugged, already formulating how he could get on her good side. As Maddie glared daggers into Zach, he tried to figure out what to do. His eyes skimmed hers once more, before he spoke slowly. I could go to Walmart to pick up some drinks, he reasoned. Maddie's anger dissipated, and she gave a loving smile. That's right. You could. Maddie took a step forward, giving Zach a quick peck on the cheek. Dressed in his hot dog costume, Zach waddled his way to the door. I gave Maddie a look. You sure known how to get your way. Maddie just let out a pleased hum, going back to the cupcakes that she was arranging. Standing, I walked over to Sarah, who was finishing painting the last details on a scarecrow. She was wearing a short black dress, in compliance to Maddie's wishes for her to be a demon. Apparently Maddie took Fletcher's suggestion seriously. How's it going? I asked, looking at the scarecrow. Sarah was dissatisfied with all the decorations at Party City, and came to the conclusion she should just make them herself. That included fake ghosts and scary signs, anything that would keep her busy. Slower every moment you talk to me. Sarah bit back, her blue eyes lifting to meet my own. What a little viper, I mumbled, kicking her lightly with my slipper. Before Sarah could hit me, I left her, walking towards the door. We waited for another few minutes, finishing up everything we were supposed to do. Zach had come back in record time, weighed down by cases on soda and water. By the time people had finally showed up, we had been waiting. Fletcher had showed up late, his boyfriend on his arm again. Though his boyfriend looked normal, he was wearing a taco suit. It seemed Zach and him had the same idea. As I greeted people at the door, I watched Connell's house cautiously. He had yet to come home, but I had a feeling he was going to show up any minute. I wasn't quite sure what his reaction to the party would be, but I could assume it wouldn't be good. I was greeting a friend when his car pulled into his driveway. Stepping away, I watched as he got out, and looked at my house. He seemed to be debating on what to do, but when his eyes met mine, he seemed less than pleased. I narrowed my eyes to meet his, almost daring him to do something. Then, almost daring me back, he got a smile on his face. One of those smiles your siblings get when they have dirt on you they can rat to your parent. He grabbed his bag from his car and turned, walking to his porch. I wasn't entirely sure if he was going to call my parents, or if he was going to use the information as blackmail, but I didn't care. He had somehow lit a fire in me, and with one angry huff, I was storming across my lawn. He had shut the door far before I got to his porch, even though he knew I was coming over. I slammed my fist against the dark wood for a few seconds, and I knew that he was just ignoring me. After a few more painful jabs, the door was finally opened, and Connell's pleasant face met mine. Problem? He asked, nonchalant. I could have killed him and his smug face, but instead I just put my hands on my hips and gave a defiant glare. At the sight of that, he looked me up and down, his eyebrow going up. When I realized what he was looking at, my face turned a bright red. I had completely forgotten that I was in costume too. I was supposed to be a cute mouse. Sarah had begrudgingly done my makeup, so I was painted multiple shades of grays, with a cute pink nose. Maddie had found a mouse costume with a set of ears at a costume store, and insisted I wear it. I thought it was unfortunately ironic. Here I was, trying to be all high and mighty, acting strong and whatnot, and I was dressed like a mouse, and Connell just happened to be the big bad wolf. Well, joke's on you, Connell. Mice bite through electrical wires and burn down houses. So, due to some kind of biconditional theorem, I'm going to burn your house down. Realizing he asked a question, I came back to attention, trying to look tough. What are you going to do? I asked. Straight to the point. Connell tilted his head, his eyes staring into mine. I felt jittery, and a shiver ran down my arms. So much for being all right around him. What do you mean? Connell gave an innocent look, stepping towards me so he could shut his door. I stepped back, closer to the stairs, and pointed to my brightly lit house. That. What are you going to do about that? I asked. I felt as though I was egging him on to do something, but if I wasn't 100% sure he was already going to do something, I wouldn't come and bug him. Connell exhaled and shrugged, squinting towards my house. I haven't decided. He rubbed his face with his hand, taking his glasses off. Although you are almost begging for something to be done. I knew he was teasing, or at least I hoped. And damn did I not like it. Or maybe, even worse, I did enjoy it. I'm assuming that's my sadistic side. I don't beg, I snorted, defensively crossing my arms. It was as though Connell had a step-by-step guide of how to upset me. Has gone through almost all steps, so we were nearing complete breakdown stage. But as for now has on the do whatever you can to piss her off steps. It's working too. Then why are you here? He asked again. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. I hadn't thought about what I was going to do past the who confronting stage. It seemed we were in a constant round of confronting and crying and fake forgiving and lies, and constant rationalizing. Answers were few and far between, so it was almost like a circle. I was confused to say the least. Some days he rips out my heart and stomps on it, and others he makes me want to hug him so hard I'd feel numb. Though normally I want to hit him. You give me whiplash, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. I could feel tears start to collect, so I willed them away. No more crying. You're just so mean, I whispered, frowning. Connell no longer looked amused, but as confused as I. There were so many emotions in his eyes. Confusion. Sadness. Understanding. Regret. Letting out a sigh, I shook my head and stood straighter, once again trying to be tough. Although I don't condone lying, damn if I didn't do it a lot. I'm going to forget you, I said. I'm going to transfer classes and never think about you again. I swallowed, taking in a deep breath. Connell shifted, and I could hear his heart race. Good, I thought. This better affect you. I deserve better, I bit. That was the last thing I said. I turned and stomped down the stairs, blocking my hearing so I couldn't hear any of the outside world. In my peripheral vision, I could see him breath in and out deeply, and his hand tightened so hard around the wooden door frame that it splintered slightly. But he still stayed grounded at the door, and I kept moving. I was a liar. Not a good one either. My parents used to say I had crocodile tears for how easily I could shed buckets of tears at anything. This was especially useful when I wanted to get Zach in trouble. Now, most of my tears are real. I couldn't switch classes, not this late in the year. It was an empty threat. There was no way around me seeing him again, considering we were neighbors. All there was to do was sit in my bed and frown at a wall for long periods at a time. One Monday, my heart was heavy. My parents had come home from the conference, and the comforting smell of waffles woke me up from my deep slumber. I got myself ready slowly and quietly, my brain still mulling over what had happened over the weekend. It was such a cat and mouse chase, only it went in circles. Mustering enough energy to get out of bed, I looked around my bedroom floor for clothes that would be okay to wear. I found some jeans and a slightly wrinkled shirt, and put those on. I let out a huff every time I bent down, my bones creaky and tired. My mother gave me a soft smile when I came into the kitchen, walking forward to hug me. I had been asleep when they arrived last night, and we hadn't seen each other in a few days. I let her hug me, and even made an attempt to hug back, before walking over towards my place at our table. "Ruby, you okay? You're looking a little rough." My mother eyed my outfit up and down, wincing at my hair. I shrugged, taking a bite soft waffles. Pouring a generous amount of syrup on them, I took my time eating. I was late when I had finished, but my mom didn't say anything. She looked like she was fretting in the corner, but still gave me a loving smile when I waved goodbye. I grabbed my bag on the way out, and got into my car quickly. Patting the console lovingly, I sighed. It was going to be an interesting day. I drove quickly, but not speeding. I knew I wasn't going to make the bell, even if I tried. So, there was no point in trying. It was nice not having to fight to get into my parking place when I got to school. A few stray cars were pulling up as well, but the parking lot was nearly empty. Even the walk to the building was sluggish and calming. In the back of my mind, I wondered if I was just serene, or I had given up, or if I was serene because I had given up. I pulled the respected books out of my locker before going to class. Nobody said anything to me as I walked in, and I only got fleeting glances. They were talking loudly amongst themselves, and Fletcher was doing some silly presentation in the back. Connell was staring at me when I sat down. Normally he would be doing something like grading papers, looking the opposite way of me as I walked in. Today he was doing what I did so often: stare. I looked up to him, my tired eyes meeting his. He didn't hold any particular expression. A hint of conflict crossed his eyes, and his eyebrows scrunched down, before returning to normal. I watched him dully, not having enough energy to do much else. I sighed, glancing down at my empty desk. He shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. Tapping his fingers on his desk, he contemplated something in his mind, before motioning for me to come up. I looked around, before pointing towards myself. He rolled his eyes, and once again curled his fingers inwards to get me to come. Like a dog, I obediently got up and walked towards him, my fingers running along the edges of people's desks as I walked. When I got to his own desk, he rolled out from the desk, and came to the side. "Ruby, you look tired," he said. I frowned, and blinked a few times. "Really?" He swallowed at my annoyed response, and lifted his blue eyes to my own. "Go home," he told me. It was an unexpected response, so I tilted my head, and took a step back. "What?" I asked, confused. He was a confusing man, that was for sure. He seemed like he didn't want to be talking to me, like it bothered him. Still, he repeated his words. There was an ounce of care behind them, and I was surprised he would show such emotion. There was silence as he turned away from me, pulling some random papers from his desk to look at. My mouth opened as I tried to think of a response, before closing. There was nothing to say. Walking to my desk, I picked up my bag, and looked towards Maddie and Sarah. They were both asleep. A serious case of the Mondays. They probably hadn't even realized I had come in. Turning around, I walked towards the door, giving one more glance towards Connell before leaving the room. Though I was tired, I knew I couldn't go home. My mom was home, and she would have a million questions if I came home any earlier than lunch. She would just assume I had a cut day if I came home at lunch. I was also too tired to leave the actual school, so I decided to stay a bit longer. I went to the black box, and hid in a corner. There was a seat, and plenty of pillows for me to fall asleep. I was surprised that the door was even open. I slept for hours. I've never been more comfortable in school. The nice silence, the faraway chatter of another classroom, and the soft blankets that were provided. I even slept through the nasty-sounding bells, much to my astonishment. That just showed my skills. In sleeping, of course. By the time I was awake, I only had an hour left for school. That meant I slept a long time. Figuring I should stay till the last hour was over, I went on my phone for a long time. When the bell rung, I let with the other kids. Deciding I didn't want to brave the parking lot, I walked towards the picnic tables. I just people watched as kids left the school, shaded by the trees. Just before I was about to leave, a sharp, nasally laugh made me turn. I recognized them right away. The boys I hated more than anything. The Crow brothers. A rather dark name for completely idiotic boys. They teased me when I was younger. Silly things. Like laughing at me and running up to me, saying the other liked me. I knew they didn't though. I didn't listen to them most days, and it only stopped when Mecca noticed and scared them into the next county. But Mecca's gone none. I sighed as I turned back around, wishing I could bury myself or them into the ground. If it isn't Ruby D. The tall one, Doug, sitting on the bench, uncomfortably close to me. I turned away, only to be faced with the other brother. Looking a little rough there, Ruby. The black-haired one laughed. I once again turned away. I let out a shaky sigh as I crossed my arms. Would you look at that, Ronnie? I think she's nervous, Doug said, smiling at his brother. Ronnie threw him smirk, patting me on my shoulder. Yeah, well, it's not like you have anything to worry about, Ruby. No one, we don't like you anyways, Ronnie said. He so purposely misspoke that I could have rolled my eyes. What is this, an early 2000s movie? I clenched my jaw as I blinked, trying to block them out. Maybe if I didn't answer them they would go away. She's quiet today, Doug noted, nudging me with his leg. I bit the inside of my cheek. What's wrong, Ruby? You mute now? Ronnie laughed, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. I just glared at him, trying to think about how I could murder him with it going unnoticed. You need to wash your hair, Ruby. It's gross, Doug said quickly after, pulling on one of my curls. Unable to take any more, I shot out of my seat, digging my feet into the dirt. I turned towards them, my tearful eyes looking at their smirks. Just shut up, both of you. I pray for whoever marries you, they'll need it, I shouted, grabbing my bag from the ground. I ran at there laughing, trying to take deep breaths as my teary eyes followed the path towards my car. As I passed the side doors of the school, I saw a familiar face. Connell was staring at me, his key card still in his hand, confusion clear on his face. I let out another cry when I saw him, dramatically running the other way. It was like the entire world was against me, and he was just sprinkles on top. He called out my name as I left. I walked in a different direction of the parking lot, towards the fields. Upon seeing the different sports teams getting ready, I walked down the only trail we had. It was overgrown and a little sketchy, but it seemed like it would work. I wasn't sure for what, but felt confident anyways. I tried fruitlessly to brush my tears away as I walked further down the trail. I could hear his boots crunch on the leaves behind me. He was following so quickly, but he still kept a distance. When I came to a curve, I stopped and turned. When my red eyes and his met, I swallowed. Why don't you want to be my mate? I asked. It was a question I had asked before, maybe not this dramatically, but I had still asked it. Connell stood in the middle of the path, looking lost. He was still trying to figure out my brain, and I knew he was getting himself confused. I was a teenage girl. I had no rhyme or reason. Ruby, he murmured slowly. Pain was clear in his face, and for the first time I actually saw who he was. He was in pain. What's wrong with me? I cried out, clenching my hands into fists. I swayed gently, my vision spotting. I had gotten myself too worked up. Connell rushed forward and took me into his arms, sitting me down on the ground. The dirt was hard, and luckily not wet. The last of the autumn leaves had fallen, coloring it reds and oranges. I don't know what I did, I sobbed, putting my face into my knees. I was gasping for breath, and I could feel my chest constricting. My trouble breathing caused me to cry more, and I found myself getting dizzier as I struggled to control myself. Connell shushed me, unzipping my jacket and pulling me to his chest. He put my hand to his chest, and took a few deep breaths to calm himself. As I tried to catch my breath, I listened to his heart, and found it calming. In a broken voice, Connell spoke quietly. I don't want to hurt you, Ruby. I swallowed, my cries quieting. I looked up at his face. His eyes were stormy and shiny, and I could see his nose getting red as he tried to control his own emotions. He was in a fight with himself and his wolf. You already have. I let out one more tearful sigh, casting my eyes downwards. Connell seemed to look off, before rubbing his eyes. He tightened his arms around me, even though I was getting to the point that I didn't need his touch. If I love you, I could hurt you more, he claimed. His eyes looked into mine, pleading for me to understand. But I didn't, and I probably never would. I'm dying like this, I whispered, my hands tightening around his sweater. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the pure silence I hated so much. He was fighting himself in his head, but his eyes were still trained on me. God forgive me, he mumbled to himself. With that, he lowered his head down to mine, and pressed his lips gently to mine. It wasn't like other kisses, at least, none I had ever had. It was so soft, so sweet, and it tingled, like, a lot. It almost felt like poppets were all over my lips, only vanilla flavored. He didn't stop kissing me after that. They weren't full-on, ferocious make-out kisses. They were gentle kisses, because we had plenty of time to do the other kind. Ruby scrunched her nose up when she didn't know the answer to something. I had seen her do it multiple times in class, far too many times for my own comfort, as well as a few times when she was trying to argue with me. She was doing it now, crisscross in my living room, looking back and forth between shades of brown, trying to figure out which one to use to color her hand turkey. This color, or this color? Ruby lifted the color pencils in front of her face. I lifted my eyebrow, putting down the pen I had been grading my papers with. Shouldn't you be doing your English homework? I asked, giving her a look. She sighed dramatically and put her pencils down, flopping onto her stomach. She barged into my house only a few minutes after me, and insisted she do her arts and crafts in my living room since her mom didn't want paint on the floor. Before I could tell her that I didn't want paint on the floor, she was already moving the coffee table. I'll do it later. Ruby gave me a cheeky smile. That was her way of saying she would do it during class. I myself sighed, trying to find it in my heart to reprimand her. After I had completely thrown my resolution out of the window, saying no to her became incredibly hard. I had tried so hard to protect her from the possibility of getting hurt, only to realize I was hurting her anyways. It was painful, trying to let her go, but I thought it was for the best. I tried to be a jackass, scare her away, but every time she was in trouble I couldn't help but run to her aid. My soul was bound to her, and it was foolish for me to think I could just leave her, and let it be. She doesn't understand my reasoning. I understand why. I couldn't say much on the matter. The less she understood, the less chance she would get tangled up. I had to protect her from my past, and the people in my past. The would try to claw her out of my arms, and probably die in the process. I hadn't noticed Ruby get up from the floor and settle in next to me on the couch. She had made quite a few hand turkeys, apparently all for her teachers. I continued marking essays under Ruby's watchful eye. Well, more like wandering eye. She looked all around the room. At me. At the pictures on the wall. She couldn't stay on one thing. Her interest seemed to peak at a picture I had forgotten I had put out. It was one of a few of my old pack members. My best friend had his arm wrapped on me, though he was scowling. That was just his normal form though. Ruby slid off of the couch, walking up to the table the picture was on. She picked it up, her head tilting like a puppy. Suddenly she smiled, turning to me. Hey look, it's you, she exclaimed, as though it was new information to both of us. I nodded, looking at the picture. She walked over, climbing beside me with the picture in her hand. Are these your packmates? She asked. She hesitated as she asked me, as though she was going to be scolded for asking a question about them. She must have felt the uneasiness in the air, but her curious nature got the best of her. I gently took the picture from her, examining it. Some of them were my packmates, others weren't. My best friend was the alpha of a pack up north, so some of them were his members. Some are, I told her. She gave me a look that said she wanted to know more, without fully coming out and saying it. This is my best friend, I continued, pointing to the Asian boy in the middle. We were younger then, but he was still towering over me by a few inches, even though I've always been tall. It's been a few years since the picture was taken, but he's still bigger than me. Both of our packs had harsh training rituals, but his was even more so because of the toxic relationship his pack had with most others. He was an alpha, and a demanding one at that. Ruby let out a hum as she focused in on him. She seemed to be deciding what she thought of him, before giving me a look. "What's his name?" she asked. "Louis." I put the picture down on my lap, sighing. Louis has called me early in the week, a few days after I had accepted Ruby. As soon as I told him, he told me that I couldn't stick to anything, and was a dumbass. Did I mention that he's an asshole? Guess it spreads around. I knew he didn't mean it the way he said it though. He knew as well as I why I was trying to keep her away from me, and was the only one who understood. In some ways he was right. I was a dumbass who couldn't stick to anything. Still, at the end of the conversation, he told me to take care of her. One of the few times he showed care for someone. Ruby looked at the other people in the picture, deciding on what to ask next. "Did you like your pack?" she inquired. "Yeah, I did," I told her. There was no point in lying, her wolf would know. Most things and people in my pack were pleasant. Certain things, however, were not. Ruby looked at me, puzzled. "So why did you leave?" I blinked a few times, taken aback. Ruby herself seemed a little taken aback that she would ask a question like that, considering she had been careful with the others. She bit her lip, putting the picture to the side. I didn't like seeing her like that, like she had done something wrong. "I left because I wanted to do other things," I told her. It was a half-truth, and one I hoped she'd accept. I had left my pack partially because I wanted to explore. My parents had been the alphas, so we were trained as such. I saw little of the outside world other than glimpses of towns as we drove from pack to pack. The only time I got out was when we had pack business. Still, if I could go back. Ruby contemplated my answer, smiling to herself. I saw a lot of myself in Ruby. She wasn't entirely sure what she wanted to do, as she explained to me one afternoon. To her, the real world was still a long way away, something not to be worried about just yet. I wish I could have lived in a regular pack. I mean, sure, we were like that once, but ever since the Alpha and Luna left, we've been kind of a wreck of a pack. Ruby jabbered. My interest picked up at her talking about her pack. I wasn't aware there really was a structure. Her parents had the power of high-ranking leaders, but it was a faux alpha rank. Not bloodborne. Not that that mattered. What mattered was whether or not they could lead. It seemed like when the previous Alpha and Luna left, they fell into a loose pack. No pack meetings, no pack house, or pack grounds. Just a selection of wolves that once had that bond. They were safe from being rogues though. It seemed like they had enough of a structure to keep them from becoming lone wolves. Still, I feared what would happen if wolves decided to leave. And there weren't enough to call a pack. I still had bonds to my old pack. There was nothing that could cancel out an alpha's bond to their pack. They would always be attached. I wouldn't be bothered if I became a lone wolf anyways. I had too much power for someone, unless a pack with more power than myself, to bother me. "Will you ever go back?" Ruby's big eyes looked into mine, as though asking me once again if I'd ever leave her. She was cautious about that, just like her wolf. "I'm not sure," I said. And at her dejected look, I continued. "If I do, I'll take you with me." She smiled, her eyes lightening. She hugged me, her arms wrapping tightly around my neck. When she settled down into the crook of my arm, I gave her a quick kiss on her forehead, and started to grade again. Before I could get very far, she pulled on my sweater, making me look at her. "Connell?" she asked, and I nodded for her to continue. "Can you give me an A on my English paper?"